Takes a second. Okay, I believe we're live now with Anthony Migchels, and our focus is the Achilles heel to the New World Order. The Achilles heel, the linchpin that holds the entire system together is their ability to monopolize the money system. And, you know, Anthony Migchels is one of the world's foremost advocates and most knowledgeable people about monetary reform, because within the realm of monetary reform, there is so much deception because it is the Achilles heel. It is the place that the system has the most deception, because some people think you just got to get rid of the Federal Reserve. Some people think you got to get back into gold and silver money. Some people think that you got to get rid of gold, like Bill Still, and have a national currency like Lincoln or Hitler or whatever. And what we're promoting is something more local and organic. So Anthony, can you talk about that? We're reaching out to the yellow vest people because they're just regular people that are protesting. They don't know what to do, and we want to make sure that they don't fall into the same pitfalls that the Occupy Wall Street movement, the Tea Party movement, the Ron Paul movement, the Fed movement. That's what happens. It ends up being led by Judas goats. So go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, well, in the first place, Wayne, I got to say that I'm really very impressed with the kind of knowledge that the yellow vests are showing. I mean, I posted about a month ago. I posted an interview with a French guy who was basically explaining, well, our monetary policy is set by guys in Frankfurt, and we're paying interest over newly printed money, blah blah. So basically, what it's all about.
And you're in Holland, like, just so everybody knows that you're in Holland.
Yeah, I'm in Holland. That's right. Yeah. So and this was a month ago. And you know, obviously you are aware that this notion that this is about some stupid fuel tax is just nonsense. I mean, this is a revolt against 30 years of neoliberal destruction of the French working class, and also the middle class, of course. But I like to focus on the working class, or better said, on the working people, which basically involves the working and the middle class, because middle class and working people are both dependent on an income based on labor and on actual production. But having said that, so they know what is at stake. They know full well that there is a wholesale war going on from the plutocracy against the French people. And I'm pretty sure they're also aware that this is not alone against the French people, but that all Western peoples are victimized by this wholesale destruction of neoliberalism, which is both economic. We have seen that worker rights and worker incomes have been slashed over the last 30 years, whereas the economy was so-called growing, but all the economic growth is ending up with the richest 10%, and actually with the richest 0.001%. And people know this. They are fully aware. They're fully aware that people like Macron are working for these bankers and for these plutocratic families. Of course, some will know more than others, but I think that this is, you know, that people know. They are aware, and this is why these demonstrations have been so vicious. So let us be real here. The aggression has been coming from the French state and not from the people. There was a brilliant guy, a huge boxer, who took down a police officer, and it was a bit of a scandal. And then you have all the hypocrites from the state complaining about the police. You know, this boxer actually taking down one cop. But we have seen countless videos of 6 or 8 state goons, one guy lying on the floor, and they just hammering him, you know, with their sticks and their batons and what have you. So, and this is what actually is causing the violence in France, not so much the protesters. And they are afraid. Macron's afraid, and the establishment is afraid. On the other hand, they have been preparing for this for many years, because I've seen this very clearly in Holland, and I'm quite sure it's the same all over Europe and indeed in the United States. That Western states have been preparing for an implosion in social cohesion, which they have been fomenting with neoliberal economic policies, but of course also the migration travesty, which is basically coming down to a sort of ethnic cleansing of Europeans in Europe. And this is what people are up in arms against, and of course they are being defamed by the media. But they're saying, "Oh, they don't even know what they're protesting." And here in Holland, there is this national myth that that Holland is a great country and that we've got it all so good here, and that people like to complain, but there's no real reason for it. But that's just moronic nonsense, of course. People here are being exploited to the max by international finance. And corporations like Shell, they steal all our resources, just like they do in Europe, in Africa, and everywhere else. I mean, we pay here massive prices for gas that is being taken out of our own soil here, for instance. So that's just one example. And this is the way it is on the capitalism, and people are getting fed up because they realize full well that a few rich turds are taking everything, and that they are expected to pay. So that's what it's all about. So when it comes to what to say about the banks, you know, the great thing about the yellow vests is that the latest news is that that they're now saying you should take your money out of the bank. This is the most direct way of attacking the system. And this is obviously fantastic news, Wayne, because I've been promoting to take money out of the bank for years, because obviously banking is a completely nefarious and criminal institution. Usury is theft and even murder, so we should absolutely not partake in it, and we should not partake in banking. And the fact that banking can rule is purely because of our cooperation. I mean, if people don't put money in the bank, banks won't rule. It's really as simple as that. So taking money out of the bank is a perfect first step. But there is also a limitation to this action, because it is a negative action, and with negative I don't mean bad, but I mean it is an action against. It is destructive. It destroys the banking system, which is good. But the next step, obviously, is to explain what is the answer, the alternative, the real solution to banking. So banking must be destroyed. Banking cannot survive. This really is about the people versus the banks. The banks are the international owners of everything, and there is
globalists.
The globalists are the bankers, and the banking is the core of globalism. International finance is what drives globalism. So this is a war between two factions of people, and there is place for only one. We can have a world ruled by bankers, and in such a world there is no place for honesty, no place for justice, no place for real rights for the masses, for the toiling and working masses. Or we can have a world that is in accordance with the laws of the spirit, and with what the vast multitude, the vast majority of the people really need, which basically is a fair deal and control over their own production, because usury allows idle classes, parasites, to usurp the production of people who actually produce, people who create something. So this is what the war is all about. And okay, there are even deeper motives like the occult, etc. But the process by which the production of the common man is usurped is banking, and banking is the key weapon of the slaver class, the plutocrats.
Yeah, just so, you know, focusing on the problem side, like something that you bring up quite often, I wanted to make mention of is Margaret Kennedy, I believe it was, did a study about how 40% of everything that we purchase has embedded usury. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is one of the key things that that is probably still unclear to most people. But even if you have zero debts, you are totally enslaved by the banking cartel, for the simple reason that 40% of the prices that we pay for our daily goods are cost for capital that producers need to pass on to us. And cost for capital is another word for interest and usury, and an extension of usury, basically. And so if you are an average American or an average Frenchman, which most people live paycheck to paycheck these days, and they're dependent on the wage, and they live from the end of the month to the end of the month. And that means that everything you make with your labor, you spend mostly on the landlord and a few mega corporations, and the rest for a little food and maybe a little entertainment, but most goes to the parasites. And this money that we spend, 40% of it indirectly ends up with the bankers, even if we have zero debts ourselves. So this is crucial to understand. You cannot resist interest slavery by not going into debt. This is really very important for people to get. So 40% of the working people's money goes to usury directly, just from doing groceries, basically.
Excellent point. And so like a good, you know, if you think of 100 years ago, most people individually had very little debt themselves. But as time goes on, those businesses are all get mortgages. They get individually, the owners of the businesses get mortgages. The business themselves is all run on credit. So all this usury gets embedded to the cost of everything, and then just embedded in the, when you pay property tax, you're paying usury. When you pay income tax, you're paying usury. When you're, so it's just, it's everywhere, and the debts have exploded. And so we've articulated the problem, and we've got this monstrous thing. We're looking at like the size of these bankers. They got all these armies, the mercenary police and the military. And I think what they want for these to be these physical conflicts, because what happens, I think, is like, you see, you're rooting for the yellow vests, and you see that when that big boxer guy was knocking out, like you're like cheering that on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
more power to him.
But in the meantime, it's really not fixing anything. Like it really serves you, because there's a lot of people that they see that and they want to support the state. They're on the other side of that, and they get energized when the protesters get beat down. So the adversary that's financing it, they're actually fed by all of this negativity, all the anger on both sides of it. When if we can step away from that and get into solution, actually in Nehemiah 5, it had a successful usury, righteous Jew Nehemiah led a successful debt, usury, and land revolution. All three of those, debt, usury, and land. They gave back the usury, they gave back the principal, they gave back the loan. So all we're looking to do is protest, but do it smartly. Make sure that you're targeting the specific root cause evil, and come in with the intention that if you don't do these things, you're involved in a color revolution that isn't affecting the root cause evil. And these guys are world-class experts. Our controllers are world-class experts on creating and instigating false loyal opposition revolutions, or taking honest revolutions of sincere and good people and taking them into a ditch where it doesn't help them at all the way to the point of like the French Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution or the American Revolution. These guys have financed all of these revolutions. So can you talk about the corruption of revolutions a little bit?
Yeah, you make a very great point there, Wayne, because what demonstrating is basically about is venting off steam. That is what it basically does for the people, and there's nothing wrong with showing a little bit of discontent, etc. But the problem is that the masses are usually not very well informed. It is getting much better since 2008. Things really are improving, and we must also understand that in the 30s, when there was the Great Depression, that people were so fed up with the situation, and their suffering obviously was so intense, that there was a deep soul searching and a deep searching among the masses here concerning the nature of the Great Depression. And during these years, in the 30s, there was a widespread societal debate about banking reform. So what you would have is very normal people, working people, miners, factory workers. They would be discussing monetary reform and banking reform in the streets and in the pubs. Obviously, this is a very far cry of where we are today, but we are moving in that direction again. And if you compare where we were 10 years ago and where we are today, and like I was saying about this French guy that was just explaining a month ago, basically everything that you and I have been talking about for many years now. And so that is a good thing, but the lack of information of the masses really sets them up for usurpation of their movements by the mob controllers. And this is very, very well described also in the protocols of the learned elders, for instance. Whatever you think of this text, it is a very interesting blueprint of how the conspiracy works. And they gloat in this text very strongly about how their agents are easily put in front of the mass demonstrations. And these agents feed these masses with their own ideas, which are obviously serving then their masters, all our masters. And because our minds are controlled, this is the problem. I mean, the New World Order, of course, they have power, they have armies, etc. But the most important thing is that they control our minds. They control what we think. They control our convictions. And this is how they really rule. And this is what happens always when there is a discontent with the people. They take to the streets. And if the powers that be want a revolution, they let it go on, and they send their agents in, and they let their agents direct the people, direct the mob, and this is what they usually do. But if real people, and I think that this guy that has been calling for the bank run is a real guy, just a basic guy. I think this is what my impression of him is. And I think that taking money out of the bank is really a very practical first step to blackmail the government, basically.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street was promoting that.
Were they?
Yeah, that was, to go from, the big Wall Street banks and put money into the local community banks and credit unions and that sort of thing. Kind of more like an Ellen Brown, state bank kind of movement. So they were pushing in that direction. But it's important to have the whole mindset is that the goal is to have debt cancellation, usury abolition, monetary reform, and land reform. Because what these guys will do potentially is they'll promote the bank run, and then they'll cause massive destruction.
Yeah, very good.
And then they'll offer a false solution, and then they'll blame all of the destruction on the yellow vests. Yeah,
this is definitely a pitfall, Wayne. Yeah, absolutely. This is the way they operate, and you're completely right. So this is a real risk. So so
anybody that ever brings up the topic of monetary reform again will be blamed for all of the pain and suffering that was brought about of the yellow vest movement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so absolutely.
These guys, that's what it means to be wise as serpents. This is how the serpents operate. Is they take a good thing and then, or a righteous indignation and allow them to do it, and then take the whole thing, cause suffering, and then blame it on the victim.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the threat of taking money out of the bank is very strong, and I think it's completely legitimate. But if you leave it at that, you do open yourself up for exactly the kind of machinations that you were just describing there, Wayne, because this is a very real risk. But if you have legitimate demands, and I must say that the 25 points of the yellow vests made a very decent first step impression on me. Of course, it's not ideal because it's not as clear cut as you are saying, which debt cancellation, end of usury and monetary reform, and the retaking of the land from the scum that stole it all in the distant past. These are indeed the three key ingredients of real economic liberation. But still, they had a number of very good points. For instance, what I really, really very strongly liked about the 25 points was that they described mass immigration as a problem of eternal war in the Middle East and of imperialist exploitation of French Africa, which is ongoing until this day, because French Africa is still paying with a derivative French franc, and this system has only one purpose, and that is exploiting them. And they're all deeply indebted to French imperialists. And obviously, and this is very important, it is not the French people that are behind the French Empire. French bankers are behind the French Empire, and French nobility is behind the French Empire. The plutocrats are behind the French Empire, and the French Empire takes in all the goodies. They steal everything everywhere, especially in Africa, but in the past, obviously, also in America and in Asia. And they let the taxpayer pay all the costs of empire. So the wars, the navies, the armies, the propaganda. That is all paid for by the state. And all the profits of empire are private. And that has nothing to do with the French people, because the French people are indebted and enslaved by the same imperialists that have enslaved French Africa. So this is what we need to understand, and this is what is very clear to the Yellow Vests, and which is great, because the controlled opposition against migration is always focusing on the migrants. For instance, you have all this Zionist controlled resistance against migration that's constantly bashing Muslim immigrants, which is, you know, just nonsense. I mean, most immigrants are, yeah, okay, we can agree that they shouldn't be in Europe, but they're not bad people in themselves. And if we ourselves would be in their position, we'd probably be coming over there or coming over here as well. So the problem is not the migrants. The problem is the plutocrats importing all these people. And the Yellow Vests have seen this. And this is what I like about the program.
Yeah, even, you know, going deeper, it's because of this international monetary system of usury and debt that exploits these third world and turns them into impoverished countries when they're very, very rich in natural resources, causing the poverty in their nations where, you know, for the Mexicans and people from Central America come to the U.S., they're not coming here because the West has destroyed their economies. It's because the West has financed their dictator politicians and their you know, fake governments. Musa Jallo has a comment supporting what you're saying. Yes, the French even own most of the ports in Africa, even to this day. Thank you for the comment, Musa. And so it's this ongoing colonialism. They basically, like, just like the U.S. will, you know, invade countries, or England, they'll leave India, but they leave the economic system, which causes poverty, which causes all the suffering, and that's the root cause evil. So let's get into the solution of monetary reform. Anthony has an operating monetary system called the Florijn. That was the past, but nowadays we have the Florijn. Florijn, okay, I apologize. And that's a phone-based system. If you can describe it, it's Henry Garman actually came and checked it out. We made a video where we're showing it, and really, if you look at it this way, a money system, all it is a database and users. You have traders, and it's a database of the users. You have people that want stuff, and there's people that are offering stuff. And with a phone, in the same way that Uber allows everybody to that can drive, that qualifies to drive, can drive a vehicle, and everybody that's looking for a driver. So through very simple technology, we can completely bypass this whole parasitic system where the users, because ultimately it's the traders, it's the users of the currency which give the value. Our labor, our faith, and our belief in any currency is what gives that currency value. So Anthony Migchels has one. Talk about it, please. Yeah. Before I talk about the Florijn and its specifications, Wayne, I'd like to take one step back and talk a little bit first about the key issues in the monetary system. They're very clear to you, but I think it's worthwhile to discuss it for the people watching this video. The issue with money, let me first say that the problem is not money in itself. We need money to exchange. Money is simply a tool, like a hammer, which was invented to facilitate exchange between people. And there's nothing wrong with equal exchange if it's equal, a fair exchange. So there is this misunderstanding about this. You have some people saying we should get rid of money entirely. I don't agree with that. I mean, I do think that we can do with a lot less money, and that a lot of transactions can be settled without money.
But there is this notion that everybody has to give everything away, and that this is the best. And maybe this is theoretically true, but I think that besides generosity, there will always be a desire for simply independent people to honestly exchange with each other. This is a very viable way of living together. And this is what money is supposed to facilitate. And the problem is not so much money in itself. The problem is what the bankers have done to our money. And what have they done to our money? The list is very long, but the basic things, the basic issues are that they create the money as debt and next have us pay interest over this debt. And at this moment, at this point in time, already worldwide, working people are paying 12 trillion in usury per year to the very rich who own the banks. 12 trillion. The French economy is about 2 trillion, so that gives you an idea of the kind of money that is involved here. Total global GDP is, I should say worldwide GDP is 60 trillion. And usury, it takes about a quarter of total GDP. And all this money ends up with the very richest. So usury is a wealth transfer mechanism, and interest on loans of money is the core income of the plutocrats. They have additional income streams, but all these additional income streams have been financed with usury, because if you have this income in usury, what do you do with it? You start investing. You use that money to invest. So you start buying up land, you start buying up corporations, and that is what they have done. And through interest on loans of money, the bankers have basically bought up everything. And this is quite literally. For instance, 80% of transnational corporations are also owned by the banks. The second problem with banking is that bankers create inflations and deflations. So what they do is they start lending and they create a real estate bubble, and next they say, oh, well, lack of faith, bad fundamentals, they stop lending, and then there is a crash. And so you have this boom and bust cycle in the economy, and this is created with inflation and deflations of the money supply. So that is another huge source of wealth for the bankers, because when they deflate the economy, everybody is dumping their assets on the market, and only the bankers have enough money to buy up all these assets at very low prices. So that is what their game is. They also use these deflations to enforce social engineering concessions. So for instance, like opening the borders. You've had all these bailouts in Southern Europe during the Euro crisis. And you can bet your life on the fact that these countries have been bailed out. Well, they have not really been bailed out, but the banks lending to them have been bailed out. But they've been given loans by the ECB and Germany and a few other countries to pay off the banks. And you can bet that that in exchange for these loans, that they have been making concessions like accepting more immigrants, promoting transgenderism, and all these social engineering things that the bankers want.
Yeah, John Perkins, the economic hitman, he has a real good video talking about how they use loans to extort, and then if the politicians don't go along, they send in the jackals. Exactly.
That's how they operate. So these are two big problems. The third is that the bankers decide who gets credit or not in society. So that's not a very wise idea, Wayne, to have bankers decide what people can invest in. You can understand that if you let these bankers decide what society can invest in, that your society is going to be a bloody mess. I mean, that's not brain surgery, but for some reason people overlook this. So that's the third big problem of money. So if you have these problems, usury, inflation and deflation, and banker controlled allocation of credit, these are the three problems, and these are the three problems with money that we need to solve. So the best solution for interest on loans of money, there is really only one solution to this, as you well know, and that is no interest on loans of money. It's really very simple. And this means that we need to migrate to a monetary system which has no interest on loans of money. And this is really, this is the absolute core issue. And how you organize this, to be honest, I couldn't really even care too much about it. Ideal is locally controlled monetary institutions, but if the government circulates interest-free credit to the people, not to just the state, but to the people, which that is vital. then I'd be sympathetic to that as well. But the issue is that obviously the state at this stage is not going to reform the monetary system. That is really the absolute last thing that they're going to do. I mean, well, when they're going to reform the monetary system to provide interest-free credit to the people, then we know that we have won and that that the devil is basically sent packing. So that's not going to happen today or tomorrow. But the good news is that we don't have to wait for this, because there's really nothing that is stopping us from creating high-end interest-free currencies ourselves. And there are huge challenges involved in this. Many challenges of very different nature, but it is completely viable, and it also has been done already in the past. For instance, in Switzerland, which is across the border in France, you have the Swiss weir, and they have a huge, basically a commercial barter, but with very cheap credit. And these folks there, they turn over a few billion per year. And it's very primitive money, and they only enlist businesses. Consumers are not allowed to partake. So, but even with these limitations, they're still turning over a few billion per year. And Swiss businesses, all small and medium business that partake, they're all saying that it has proven hugely beneficial for them. It provides them with extra turnover, and it is especially effective during downturns, because downturns are nothing but deflations. Downturns happen when the money supply dwindles, and especially during these periods, the weir is extra effective because it can at least somewhat alleviate the capital scarcity that is a result of the deflation. So this is not theory. This is happening everywhere, and already. And for instance, you also saw this happening in Argentina after their crash. Some time back by now, but they of course suffered a couple of major crashes themselves, and they have also I think interest-free based let's kind of system that they operate there. Very primitive, but nonetheless still somewhat effective, and definitely helping the people to manage this money scarcity problem that they're dealing with. And at this stage, I think that for the currency designers, like I am myself, like you are, and like the other people in the world that are involved in this stuff, because there are many, of course, their challenge now is to make the next step in currency design, because what you're seeing nowadays is that the currencies that they're circulating, they all have quite serious limitations, which are unnecessary, and which are simply the result of the fact that it is still a nascent field. We're still at the beginning of this field. There's a lot of research that needs to be done, a lot of experimentation, what it takes to create really high-end currencies that can fully compete in the marketplace with the banker units. Because let's face it, if interest-free money is really that good, it should be able to compete with the banker units. If an interest-free currency in a free market environment cannot compete with the banker units, then something is seriously amiss. Obviously, if there is no added value that makes people pay with the unit, then it has no right to exist. But obviously, it does have a right to exist, because ultimately, everybody, I think 99% of Americans, when asked whether they prefer a mortgage at 5% or at 0%, will answer, "Give me the 0% mortgage." So, and that should be the basic line, I think, for currency designers, and for we shouldn't be talking about the problems of banking, although maybe at times when the problems are so huge as they are today, then it's more important. But my experience is that people, they don't really get it, and many don't want to know. But if you can create a viable currency, and if you can go into the market and say 5% or 0%, that's how you're going to reel people into using your currency. And this is of course a huge opportunity for everybody who's really serious about fighting globalism and capitalism.
So we're on the topic of monetary reform, and most people, whenever I bring up that topic, they go, "Oh yeah, I just started investing in Bitcoin." And so the good part I like about Bitcoin is that you can just do it. You don't need a vote. You don't need to wait for permission for anybody and all that sort of thing. but in the cryptocurrency arena generally, that's a commodity-based system. And because it's a commodity, it will never be loaned without usury. And what the problem is those groups generally, they think today we are suffering from inflation. And we're not suffering from inflation, meaning we have too many Federal Reserve notes. Most Americans or people globally, they're suffering from deflation. Yeah. Deflation is when the shelves are full and your bank account is empty. Yeah. Right? That's lack of money. Yeah. Right? So even though prices are going up, it's not because there's too much currency in the system. No. Inflation is when the shelves are empty and your pockets and the bank account is full because you have too many units of currency. So what they're doing is they're starting on a lie, and that lie is that the prices are going up. We have inflation. You have worthless Federal Reserve notes. They're printing. While that may be the case, we aren't getting it. We don't have it. The common man does not have too many Federal Reserve notes. Or
all the printing goes directly into the stock exchange and in all these other ridiculous bubbles that only benefit the rich, because normal people don't have money in the stock exchange except for maybe 1 or 2 thousands. But the real money in the stock exchange is obviously all owned by the very wealthy. And these are the ones that have been profiting from all the inflation, because the inflation that has been there, namely the 16 trillion that the Federal Reserve Bank printed in the aftermath of 2008. All this money has been going to the people that have been causing the crisis, and the money is only circulating in the financial economy and is designed not to enter Main Street, which is being crushed by deflation. And what we currently have is what is now nowadays known as stagflation. And stagflation is when there is no money in Main Street, or at least too little money, while prices are rising, and the rising prices are caused by manipulations, all sorts of speculation.
Usury.
Well, usury has obviously a structural upward effect on prices, but the money power is also well capable of, for instance, in 2006, they rose prices of oil by a factor 10 in a very short time, and they did this with pure speculation, basically. Mm-hmm. So, and this is also the big problem of Bitcoin. There are good things about Bitcoin, which are really proving to be of value. For instance, nowadays you have people getting disconnected from YouTube and Facebook, and also from PayPal. So people in the liberty movement, but also progressives, they are being shut down by PayPal. So they are being denied access to the payment structure that on the internet, which is PayPal. And Bitcoin is at least offering a bit of an escape for these people, which is really very beneficial. Let's face it, because that's a real tyranny, you know, when the state and when state outlets like PayPal, and of course PayPal is a business, but ultimately controlled by the big invisible world government behind the scenes. So the world government is simply capable of denying you sustenance if you don't partake in the party line, and that is obviously. Yeah, it doesn't.
It's the mark of the beast, really.
Yeah, it really is the mark of the beast, Wayne, isn't it? I mean, there's no other way of describing it. So that's really very. They can cut us off, and Bitcoin allows for at least a bit of an escape there. And of course, all alternative currencies allow for less dependence on the banking system. So this is a very important a positive of Bitcoin, but obviously a coin that is based on speculation and that people buy in the hope that it will be worth more tomorrow. That is exactly what we do not want in modern money. What we want is speculation-free money. We want transparent and predictable exchange rates. And we want income through labor, and we want people to acquire an income by adding value for other people. We do not want people to get incredibly rich by speculating behind their computer screen and adding nothing of no value whatsoever to their brethren. And everybody will have to get used to the idea that they need to work to eat, and especially the parasites.
Yeah, especially the parasites, and that's
Wayne,
not so.
Wayne, can you give me 1 minute, please? I'm being disturbed here. Excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah, not a problem. Okay, so we didn't have this scheduled. I just was messaging through Facebook with Anthony, so I'm very. It was like a short notice thing, and you know, he's in Holland, so we have I'm in Tampa, Florida, so there is a time differential. So Musa Jallo has a comment: usury or interest is bad, as Allah said in the Quran. Those who consume interest cannot stand on the day of resurrection, except one stands who is being beaten by Satan into insanity. That is because they say trade is just like interest, but Allah has permitted trade and has forbidden interest. So whoever has received an abomination from his Lord and desists may have that is past, and his affairs rest with Allah. But whoever returns to dealing in usury, those are companions of the fire. They will abide eternally therein. So there's the verse in the Quran. I thank you for the comment. And Jim Callahan says, at work, tag for later. Jim is my pool guy buddy. Jim's worked with me across the past 2 pool seasons. And Jim and I talk, the way Anthony and I are talking is how we talk on the pool sites. And I mean, we're regular guys, okay? And it's very important, I think, for the yellow vest movement to take a policy position that they, whoever the leadership is, and I commit to doing this. In fact, Yah commands us to be leaders and to be role models, and that Yah does not want his people to look like sheep without a shepherd. Meaning, through tribal exodus government, you have judges of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. And it's through that government that we can implement a usury-free money system, because eventually you got to be able to pay taxes, right? That's a very big thing. So part of the way that the system monopolizes money or can play favorites with any particular form of money is through whatever currency that the establishment says that this is how you pay your tax. Well, it could be cow poo patties, right? If you can pay your tax with cow poo patties, that will become the dominant currency because everybody is paying a tithe, right? Well, what's unique about biblical law is you can actually pay your tithe or slash your tax, where you can pay that with your flocks and your herds and your oils. This is what it explains in Deuteronomy 14:23 through 25, is we can pay our taxes with labor-based produce, labor-based agricultural products, and it's through the implementation and the ability to pay with labor, it allows everybody to pay their tax without going through a third-party usurper or a third-party money lender or a third-party intercessor. So it's these third-party parasites that come in and through deception, through corrupting currency, through money monopoly, they get their currency as the dominant means by which that you pay the tithe. Then that monetizes whatever that is. So, you know, if I control the gold mines in society, but you can pay your tax with flocks and herds and oil, it really doesn't matter if, you know, my monopoly of gold doesn't help me to control the society. But if I'm able to destroy that economic system or somehow or other bribe the people that they require the payment of tax in gold or silver, now we've monetized the gold and silver. Now he who has the gold mines me. Now I have the ability to control and manipulate that society, because everybody somehow or other has to get gold, because gold is required in order to pay the tax. So this is an extremely important part of monetary reform, is that, you know, if you can pay your tax with flocks and herds and oil and labor-based products or a labor-based currency, which Deuteronomy 14:23 through 25 advocates, it actually explains in there, if you can think about how you pay the tax, right? You have a society where, okay, I'm going to switch back. All right, I was just talking about taxes, Anthony.
Yeah.
And, okay, let me get rid of this banner. I'm a little slow with this. So in terms of the ability to pay tax, whatever means by which one can pay tax, that unit becomes the dominant unit in society. And within biblical economics from Deuteronomy 23 through 25, you can pay your tithe without even having money. You can pay it with flocks, herds, oils, and corn, and that sort of thing. And if you can pay your tax with that form of it's not even a currency, or alternatively, if the distance is too far away, you make a bond or an IOU in lieu of carrying the flocks and the herds and oil to the great distance. Now you come with an IOU. This allows for a labor-based currency without usury, and it allows everybody to pay the tax without the need to have some third-party monopoly of gold, silver, Bitcoin, Federal Reserve notes.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, listen, if you think about the real function of money, which is this means of exchange thing, and not a store of value, that's not what money is for. Money is to facilitate exchange. And this is really a very simple token. It is today as well. I mean, we all know nowadays that Federal Reserve dollar notes are not really notes. They're digits in a bank, in a server, in a computer system. And basically what you need is a couple of bookkeepers who keep the score for society. That is basically what bankers do. And they have created a massive myth around this monetary system about how complicated it is, and the rights of capital and the rights of finance and the time value of money, blah 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 blah. But it is all nonsense, and it is all designed to distract from the fact that we are paying an unbelievable amount of our lifeblood to a couple of bookkeepers who are just keeping scores and scorekeeping and maintaining a computer system. Of course, you need a couple of good professionals for that kind of work. You want to give these people a good salary, $100,000, $200,000, who cares? But that's it, and not 12 trillion in usury worldwide per year, and not allowing them to create massive problems with inflations and deflations, and not allowing them to starve people from cash simply because the bankers have no purpose for these people. The money supply should obviously serve the people and not the bankers, and what we have now serves only those that control the financial system at the expense of everybody else.
Yep.
So if you want to, so what we need to move to is a monetary system which is exceedingly cheap and effective, and the financial system should never be bigger than at most 1% of GDP, and it should be a small industry of bookkeepers and basically boring people. Serious and responsible people, but boring. And that's the kind of people that you want in charge of such a system, and not these cowboys that we have today. And obviously, this token, cheap as it can be, would be fully viable for indeed paying taxes, but every other economic activity in the community.
Yeah, and that's you know, I was talking a little bit, like, you know, we're wearing the yellow vests, right? The yellow vest movement is a movement thus far as we see. It's the great masses of people. They're just you know, bakers. They're carpenters. I'm a pool installer, right? Yeah. Like, that's how I've made my living my whole life, building above ground pools. From when I age 21 on, all I've done is build above ground pools, and that's what I've done. Like, to understand this stuff isn't complicated. It's like this veil that's been put over our head that only these great, knowledgeable guys. I have a degree in history, right? And it's not that I'm not some brilliant guy, and it's actually counterintuitive how simple it is to fix this system. It's very simple. Like, I think you're like, what's your work background? Like, you're working right now, right? Are you at like a business or something?
Yeah, I run the family business here after my father died last year. So we have a pedicure wholesale, but like you said, that's nothing special. Well, it's nice. I mean, it's a nice business we have here, but yeah, it pays the bills. But it's not like rocket science or anything. And I used to be a computer systems engineer and process manager, a project manager before I woke up and decided that big business and the state were not for me. So,
well, that's very useful for monetary reform, though. As a computer systems engineer, would know the architecture of the software for a currency.
Yeah. And these skills are obviously very useful in this day and age for any venture, but also indeed for my line of work as a monetary reformer. Although I was not really a programmer, I was more a system manager. And I've been dependent on volunteer programmers to create the Florijn system, and that was not easy. I can tell you, because it was a lot of work, and these programmers need to pay the bills just as much as we do. So, but we managed, and we got it done. And
let's talk about the Florijn.
Yeah. Because, like I was saying, what the problem nowadays with the currencies the alternative currencies that we see circulating worldwide, and there are many. There are the cryptos of the last few years, but before then you had already the regional currencies in Germany, also a few in the United States, in Britain, and then you also have the commercial barters and the okay. You could call Weir a commercial barter also, but in the 30s it was specifically created to deal with the aftermath of the Great Depression and the credit scarcity and the liquidity scarcity that caused. And what you see with all these currencies is that they are limited. For instance, the Swiss Weir does not allow consumers to partake, and it is also not convertible to the Swiss national unit, which is the Swiss franc. And this is a huge limitation, and which is also mentioned by many participants in the system, that this is a huge limitation.
You can't pay your tax with it then?
Well, alternative units typically are not accepted for tax payments. Maybe local taxes. I think maybe you can pay some local taxes with the Bristol pound in Bristol in England, but that is as far as it will go. Although I must say that from my preliminary discussions with the tax office here in Holland, I think it's fair to say that they would not be vehemently against it once it gets enough liquidity in the community. You know, it's understandable that they're not going to accept Florijn if there's only a few thousand Florijns going around in the system. But once, for instance, a few 100,000 people in Holland start paying with the Florijn, then it will become viable, and theoretically it's fully usable to facilitate also state finances. So that would not really be a problem. But the Florijn is my attempt, and I think a very successful attempt, and not because I did it, but this is my professional opinion. I think that the Florijn is a breakthrough currency, because it is the first currency worldwide that provides us with everything that we need from a modern monetary unit. Usability is very high. You can just use a mobile phone. It is interest-free. If all of Holland would now be paying with the Florijn, everybody in the Netherlands would be able to refinance their mortgage with my organization. And people that are... Thank you.
Hallelujah! This is no minor stuff. That this is observing the logos, logos, right? This is a big deal. This is an enormously big deal.
It is a huge deal, right, Wayne? It is, and again, not because I'm involved, not because we are involved, you and I. This is because when you take a close look at the human condition and at 5,000 years of human history, if you study this really well, you can have no other conclusion than that the monetary system is at the absolute heart of the human condition and of all problems that humanity has faced over the last few thousand years. There's no other way. There's no way around this. And finding real solutions to this enormous challenge is a big deal. And we have this interest-free currency that is easy to use, which allows for stable prices. Inflations and deflations, as we have in the banking system, are absolutely out of the question in the Florijn. We have a stable exchange rate, which is managed because we do not believe in free markets, you know, where a couple of idiots can just do whatever the hell they like and sacrifice all the real needs and real interests of the wider community. This is all wrong. We don't want free markets where you have goons who can just mess up everything with excessive market power. We want a controlled market where producers and consumers can meet each other, where demand and supply can meet each other, relying on the fact that you don't have freeloaders like speculators who raise prices and all this stuff going on. So in the Florijn exchange is predictable, is stable, is intrinsically stable. There is no way that it can go bust in the classic ways that the banking system goes bust. Yeah, what more can I say? I mean, it's like I said, a real breakthrough currency, and if everybody would start using the currency, we would liberate ourselves from banking without one shot fired.
Okay, let me get a couple comments in real quick. Musa Jallo says, "You are a good man and want a just world free from usury. May Allah, as you said, help ya achieve your mission." Thank you for the comments, Anthony. That you're doing God's will. And we have
Thanks, Musa.
Karen just sent Sharon Schreier.
I think she's a Dutch. She's from Holland as well, Karen. So hi, Karen.
Oh, she's from Holland. Okay.
Yeah.
She makes a comment here. The euro must be replaced by the Florijn. Send it to the media. Talk to people about it. Share it on your social media and with your friends. So, can we talk about the concept of convertibility a little bit? What does that mean? You have a Florijn, and now you want to convert to the dominant currency, meaning the euro, so that you can use this at certain business, use the Florijn, and convert back. How does that work?
Yeah, let us first say a bit about why this convertibility is so important. Because you have some people in the alternative currency movement who say that convertibility is not important. Even the people of Weir will say this, and the rationale is that it is good that the circuit is closed, that your alternative currency economy that you are running, that it is closed off of the other units. And this is not the case. And the reason why this is not the case is that if you have a closed circuit, what always happens in each and every of these circuits, what always happens is that you have a few successful suppliers in the network who sell a lot more and take in a lot more of the local unit than they can spend viably in the network. So when you're a very successful entrepreneur and you're making a lot of deals in your in the alternative currency, you rake in a lot of the unit, but you cannot spend them on anything that you really need. So yeah, obviously that's not going to work out. So at some point, what you see is that these businesses, they start limiting their intake, and this means that your most successful participants are starting to withdraw from the system. And this is obviously a huge issue, and this is also why the people of Weir in Switzerland, the participants, are saying why that the system is limited, because they are dealing with this issue as well. Mm-hmm. And this is why you need convertibility. So obviously,
let me witness to that. Is within Mountain Hours, I promoted Mountain Hours in Summit County. So to support what Anthony is saying is within Mountain Hours, let's say we had about 5 restaurants. We had roughly 100 traders. I did video marketing on behalf of businesses. So I would help them promote their businesses. But then you'd get like T-shirt shops and florists, and it's a tourist town. We had a ski shop, we had a grocery store, and the restaurants and the grocery stores, the things that you need to sustain life, like petroleum, food, water, transportation, housing, those are the things that human beings require to sustain life. So those businesses that have food, and that's where they act as magnet within the monetary system, and most of the currency will go to them, and they get a glut of it. And those businesses those businesses have to pay for their wholesale costs. So like up in Breckenridge at 10,000 feet, they have to buy food, but the food's all coming down from the Front Range. So they can't pay for that stuff, and you can only buy so many T-shirts, and you can only buy so many flowers. So with Anthony's system, it overcomes that limitation. Yeah. And the way I was trying to overcome it, I was going to the local county commissioners or the town commissioners, and I was trying to persuade them to get the mountain hours to be accepted to pay the tax. And if you could get them to pay, allow the business owners to pay their tax with mountain hours, then that completely eliminates that bottleneck. So they were unwilling, they wouldn't even consider it. Because why? They are just puppets. All of these politicians are just puppets for the money lenders. So that's why I always bring up the concept of tribal exodus government. The purpose of the government is to feed the widows and the orphans and create the roads and all the public works and all those sorts of things. If we create an entirely separate system, if the local governments are unwilling to accept the people's currency because they work for the bankers, then we just say, you know what, we're commanded to take care of the poor and the widows and the homeless and the pensioners to begin with. So if we just do that, we'll have a money system that just sidesteps this whole satanic New World Order system that was only created to enslave us in the first place. So mechanically, let's say I have $100 worth of Florijn, and I got to pay my tax or whatever, so I got to convert over. How does it work for me to convert back over to the euro?
You can go to our website. Say you have a Florijn account and you have this 100 Florijn in your account. You can go to the website and you can go into our app. Well, it's not really literally an app, but it's an application on our website that is very easily used on the mobile phone. So you can use the app and you can just say sell Florijn. For instance, you get the option to fill in how many Florijn you want to sell. So maybe 100. You had a balance of 100. This goes on the next we ask for how much do you want to sell them, because you can sell them for a maximum of 95 cents. And this is a little bit arbitrary, and it could change. We could make this a maximum of 97 cents or 99 cents or even 1, or we could go lower. We could say you can sell them for a maximum of 90 cents. This is something that the market still has to find out what the ideal malus would really be, because what we're doing here is if we allow you to use the Florijn as one, because in the system 1 Florijn is €1. This is a basic agreement. But then you take in the Florijn as €1 basically. Then you next sell them for 95 cents. So you basically lose 5 cents, and this obviously is not so pleasant for the entrepreneur. The reason we do this is because it forces him to reconsider selling them. We want him to have an incentive to rather spend them back into the community rather than exchanging them back to euro. But exchanging is fine, converting is fine. We just want you to feel a little bit of pain to motivate you to spend the money within the network, which is in all our interest. And very importantly, who gets this 5% discount? Because if the entrepreneur sells the Florijn on the network to the network, the person buying the Florijn gets this 5% discount. So somebody else is, say, for instance, you sell, I buy, I get your 100 Florijn for €95, which I can next spend for the full value of 1 Florijn is €1. So basically, I get a 5% €5 bonus, and I only pay €95 for €100 purchasing power. So this is not income for my organization or for the foundation that runs the Florijn. No, this is between the participants of the system,
the traders.
Yeah, the businessmen can sell their excess Florijn, and other businesses or consumers can buy these Florijn and use them to pay within the network. And the people that buy the Florijn are the ones that benefit from the 5% discount.
So basically, there's an incentive to join the trading network.
Yes.
and a disincentive to leave the trading network. And it's essentially what Berkshire's does. They have a physical currency where if you come into that community in Massachusetts, you would trade out your Federal Reserve notes and you'd get a premium, a bonus, an incentive. That way, like, so if you're buying, like, let's say you're going to spend $105 and you have $100, if you convert to the currency, you can buy the $105 worth of products with $100 just by converting to the currency. So you have a benefit. Alternatively, if you leave it. So if you think, and if working within that network, and if you got very creative, as opposed to saying somebody could look at, oh, this is a ripoff, I got to leave the system. If the individuals within the systems, like if they're a trader and they're like, well, my friend I have a friend of mine that operates, he's one of the town councilors. If I talk to him about getting the community to accept the Florijn to pay taxes, now I can stay within the system. I have a friend that owns a gas station. If I talk to that gas station owner about accepting the Florijn, then I can get, and that I have a friend that owns a refinery, a petroleum refinery, right? So this is the revolution, is rather than trying to get back into the euro, is to expand the trader network within the Florijn. And if you improvise, you adapt, and you overcome within the Florijn system, everybody wins. And eventually this system, the Florijn, becomes the dominant system. You pay your taxes in it, and then the euro just becomes an old a nightmare, an ancient history story. So these are all mustard seed ideas that we work on, but there's no reason, like the mustard seed, that we can't all dwell with them, just as Jesus talks about, and how we overcome these problems. We have to have a better story. So much of what we do, we're talking about mechanics, but what we're really talking about is a better and greater and more noble story for humanity. It's about all of us going on a hero's journey and stop complaining about the system. Rather, we are to become problem solvers. And because we have kids, we have to, if we don't do this, we're dumping all of these problems on our children. And great men overcome problems. And I want to honor Anthony Migchels for laboring and working on these problems that most people have. They have no idea the time and effort that Anthony has put into these problems, sacrificing. You know, how much abuse do you get online for taking these positions of fighting the New World Order with, being a monetary reformer? How much abuse do you take online for fighting this evil culture? Well,
the abuse I get is usually when I take non-politically correct positions, but fighting usury and banking is pretty popular, actually. So
that's what's interesting. What was really interesting for me was when I was promoting the usury-free solution of mountain hours, I was promoting it as a secular. So I would walk in, I went door to door in Summit County to virtually every business in Summit County. And I would go, because I would know, when you walk into a business, you can tell if it's a mom and pop business generally just by the doorpost, the sign on the door. If you're walking into a Subway or a McDonald's, like, I didn't try to recruit those kind of big corporate businesses. But if it's, Bill's ski rental, there's a pretty good chance that Bill might be behind the counter. And I would walk in with my Mountain Hours t-shirt, which, by the way, was yellow. And I'd say, hi, we're trying to save the world and we need your help. And no matter what that person said, so I didn't know who was there. I didn't know anybody in Summit County at all. Just, alluding to what you're saying, I didn't get into the divisive stuff at all. And I would basically say that, and whoever that person was that was behind the counter, they have one thing in this world that they actually hate about the modern human condition, civilization. And it might have been global warming, which I don't agree with, the solutions particularly. So they would say, oh man, we're destroying the environment. And I go, yes, this system is a war on the environment, which it is. It's completely destroying our ecology. It's destroying the animals. It's destroying the natural world. And I would support what they're saying and say, like, the number one way that we can fight, regardless of whether it's, if your issue is immigration, if your issue is poverty, if your issue is housing, regardless of what your issue is, the root cause evil is monetary reform, or the solution. The cause of it is a wicked money system, the technology of a wicked money system. The solution is a benevolent money system. Yeah. And people joined up, and those people joined up, and they're almost entirely secular. They didn't join the usury-free system because they hated usury. In fact, it was the Christians, sadly, that were the most resistant. I never had a Christian come up to me or anybody say, oh, I hate usury too, I want to join.
Yeah. No.
As soon as we were talking about usury, so that's the reason why I started going into the churches, trying to figure out why the Christians didn't want to join. Like, why did they have no interest? No concern about these issues. So it was really counterintuitive. So I agree with what you're saying, is like, if you just focus on the money side of it and you don't get into the controversial stuff, the money side will heal all the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, there is still a conflict in society. Also, you have a very large percentage in society who are positive people, maybe not fully aware people, but basically positive people who have a loving heart and who want to live in cooperation. And these are the people that are being disenfranchised also. But you also still have a large part of the people who are still fairly egotistical, and who have basically a dog-eat-dog outlook on life. And this is still fairly common. Also, on the right, you have a lot of people who still are strongly in favor of capitalism, and who have this foolish idea that one day they will be, one of the capitalists, which is absolutely not going to happen. If you're born poor, you'll never be one of the capitalists, never. And but this is a foolish dream that many people still have. But capitalism is a sociopathic ideology, so it attracts sociopaths. But most people are benevolent people, or are at least more benevolent than malevolent. And these are the people that will make it in the future, because the meek will inherit the earth, and not the not people who think they can just scoff everybody and rise at the expense of other people.
I want to make it very clear that we are neither capitalists or communists. No. What we're promoting is biblical. We promote the logos. We promote the walk, the foundation of creation. Yeah. And that is a system of basically innovated barter. It's just innovated barter. And
it is money. It is money that is liberated from all the evil doings of the bankers. It's simple, neutral means of exchange, without the usury, without manipulation of volume, and with local people deciding who gets credit instead of vampires.
So let me start. So I build pools, right? So let's say, where you are, and I wanted to join the system. Like, what's the process? Like, how does all that work?
It's the easiest thing in the world, Wayne. It takes the same amount of time for a consumer anyway. A businessman takes 5 minutes, but opening a Gmail account is basically fully comparable to opening a Florijn account. All we need to know is a name, an email address. You can lie about your name, so you can have anonymous access to the system if you want. We don't care, because we're not interested in Big Brother kind of stuff. And all we need to know is your name, an email address, and a mobile phone number, and that's all. And then you're in business. You can start paying with Florijn. And the minute you open the account, say you go into the Florijn website, you say open account, you enter the data that we require, you click OK, and your account is immediately accessible, and you can immediately buy Florijn on our exchange platform, and you can immediately start paying. So if you have no Florijn account and you want to do a payment in Florijn, it can be done in 2 minutes.
Okay, so I've got $100 of euro, or 100 units of the euro, 100 euros. I would then get 105 of the Florijn. Yeah. And then I look at the list of all the various traders. It's all online. Do you have a way on your software, like I'm hungry and I want to go to a restaurant? Can I type in restaurant and it'll list all the restaurants that? Yeah. Okay.
You can search our list of participants on the location, so city, or on the kind of stuff that they deal with. So in a restaurant or food or vacation or whatever you're looking for.
Okay. Does it geolocate them? Like if I'm in one town and it'll show the restaurants that are close? Like
I used to have that with the Gelre, and we will implement it in the Florijn as well. But at this stage, we're doing without. But that obviously is a nice application for our website.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's basically like Uber, but for money.
Yeah.
And that's like if I was looking this up to create like I was trying to figure out how much it cost to develop Uber's software, and it's roughly like $1.5 million or so. That's what they were saying. And I like whenever I see they're raising money for like the wall, or they're raising money for this or that, like some kind of problem, I just say, if you took all of that money and developed this software app, you don't have to worry about the wall anymore, because the people in Mexico will have a booming economy. You just give them the software so that they're not enslaved by the very same bankers that we're enslaved, and immigration becomes a non-issue. They're not here to invade, they're here for jobs.
Yeah, this whole bullshit about invasion, that I don't like the way that the right handles this. They're way too focused on poor people entering the country, which are obviously losers and cannon fodder, just like we are ourselves. These are the people that are on the bottom end of the power pyramid, and it's always easy. And this is a slave mentality. Yeah? We must not underestimate this. Slaves always kick down on the ladder. They kick always those even lower on the ladder. This is the slave mentality that rules the masses. But a free man, a strong man, he looks up the ladder, and he starts clawing at the ankles on top of him, because he wants to bring these folks down to his own level, because he's tired of all the bullshit coming from the upper layers of the system, and that is what a free man and a strong man does. And but this is obviously not the default position, and like you said, it's obviously very true, and it's very difficult for people to see. But all problems that we have in society are directly linked, or either directly linked to, or outright caused by the monetary system. Whether you have, for instance, just a small thing that I noted already a few minutes ago, the bankers own 80% of all transnationals. So all this toxic manure that comes out of the transnationals, whether it's toxic telecommunications with 5G now coming, or whether it's the poisonous foods that they are producing with their GMOs and heavily laced with insanely toxic pesticides and what have you, whether it's the insane entertainment that we see coming out of which is completely debasing and completely moronic, and simply a disgrace to present people with. So all this trash that is coming out of transnationals is created by businesses that are outright owned by the same bankers that are enslaving us with their monetary system. And obviously they use these transnationals not to make a quick buck, because people think that bankers are in it for the money, but the truth is that bankers already own all the money in the world, so the more money is really the last thing they want. What they are doing, they are in the process of translating their financial omnipotence into the omnipotence of everything. So they use their transnationals to increase their holding over our bodies, over our minds, over our souls. That is what they're really doing.
Yep. Okay, so Matt Leffler. Matt Leffler is a guy that I've done End the Fed protests with part of We Are Change Tampa here, right in Tampa, and he is a I don't know what more like an atheist. But anyway, he goes, even Jesus couldn't get rid of the money changers. How can we do it? So.
Sorry about that, Wayne. I'm here in the family business. So
it's totally cool. I'll cover it. Matt says slapping them around didn't get rid of them.
No, let me answer to this, because in the first place, Jesus did win. That's a little misunderstanding there by Matt, but Jesus did win. What we are witnessing now is basically the end game of a process that was started 2,000 years ago. So Satan is defeated, and Jesus did win. But he had a very different job at that stage than we have today. Our job is not to... Please, hello. Our job is not to fight bankers. Our job is to provide interest-free credit, and this is a very not so much about Jesus, but we had a Catholic economy in the past in Europe, and this was a usury-free economy. Usury was outlawed, as it is in Islam still today, and this is one of my hobby horses, as you well know. But for the people listening to the show, a key lesson of history is that the Catholic and Islamic economies failed because they only outlawed usury, but they provided no mechanic for interest-free credit. And the problem is that if you have only a monetary system without managed interest-free credit, but if you have only a monetary system, for instance, gold coins that are circulating, or tally sticks like they had in Britain before the Bank of England, the problem is that all the money ends up with the rich, as it always does, and the rich are hard of heart, as it is said, and they won't lend without interest. And what we have failed to do as a people, as peoples, is to create an interest-free monetary system. We have allowed ourselves to believe that we are dependent on the rich for loans, which is complete bogus. I mean, we can just start a bookkeeping system of our own, and we can simply keep the rich out of the loop, because we don't need them. We don't need their money. We can create new money for ourselves. And this is what, at this stage in history where we are at, Jesus' job was not so much monetary reform, although he did proclaim a jubilee, as you never tire to point out, which is obviously one of the reasons why we love him. But his job was more spiritual, and so this is not something that he was really involved in. But with lessons of Jesus and with his exhortation to lend freely and accepting nothing in return, expecting nothing in return, this is obviously the only way to really understand this proposition by Jesus, is to provide an interest-free credit-based monetary system.
Oh, Matt has a comment here. Do you support Islam and Sharia law, seeing that they don't use usury?
Well, I do support Sharia when it says that the usury should be outlawed, and Sharia obviously has more propositions that I'm not always so happy with, but many of them aren't so bad either. But that's not really the point. Islam is correct about usury, and so is Catholicism. But they failed to provide a real solution for usury, because they only outlawed it. They did not create an interest-free credit-based monetary system, and this was their great failing. And this is why both the Catholic and the Islamic economies failed to keep the bankers at bay. Yeah,
that's a really so let's say, like, for instance, Islam, the guys that I've listened to, they promote gold and silver as the only money system. And by definition, gold and silver is scarce. And by definition, you'll never find anybody that's willing to loan gold and silver with usury. So basically what it does is you effectively don't have a money system or a credit system. You have nobody that's willing to lend. And that's what, that's why the Jews eventually began lending, because people you have an event that occurs, you're broke, and you need medical care, or you lost your house, or your car broke down, or whatever, some unfortunate event. Somebody lends you money, but the only people willing to lend is with usury. Eventually, those usurers will take over, and that's the recorded history of the world. Whereas what Anthony is proposing is that you have a unit which it's non-commodity based. But it's also without usury. And now you have a means by which where you can get that loan to fix your car. Meanwhile, you're not being put into perpetual bondage. Matt says that this is wise. That there isn't enough gold and silver in the world to support a world economy. Those are not viable options.
The Imran Hossein, you were referring to Imran Hossein, who's a very brilliant Islamic scholar who I have nothing but the greatest regard for, who is also very strongly, vehemently against usury, and who clearly points at usury as a core issue in our day and age. But he is indeed wrong when he's talking about gold as the only permissible money. And as you explained perfectly yourself just now, there's no way that the powers that be who own all the gold, because this is what people must understand, all the gold is controlled by the same people that run the printing presses of the financial system, because they have been ruling the world through gold for 5,000 years now. And the libertarians should also understand that all the gold standards of the 19th century were clearly operated by the international banking cartel.
Rothschild bankrupted the world with gold and usury. Gold and usury, it's just, that's the history. It's proven history. They used gold and silver. Like, think of what the conquistadors did.
That's completely undeniable. So and completely obvious also if you take a clear look at history, and if you look at where gold is nowadays, you'll see that the Fed also claims to have 8,000 tons, but I don't think that many people really believe that. But the central banks in Europe, in China, in Russia, in India, these are the main holders of gold, and that is the gold that we are aware of, because I can tell you this: the 155,000 tons of gold that people talk about is bullshit. That's completely unreliable. That's just a non-issue. The bankers have been keeping gold scarce like every other commodity that they keep scarce, simply because that is what a monopolist does. He keeps supply scarce, so the prices are high. And the bankers are known and have also admitted in their texts that they have taken as much gold out of circulation as is humanly possible. And they have written in their own texts that the gold standard will always be the bankruptcy of the countries adopting it, and it's basically a weapon of war. And there's simply no way that you and I could create a basic monetary system with gold coins, but that is not what our banker masters have in store for us. The reason why they want to get back to gold is because gold is very scarce. Like Matt is saying, there's not enough gold and silver in the world to support the world economy. This is correct. Gold is always intrinsically scarce for a number of reasons. I have a couple of articles on my website about this issue. But gold is too scarce to finance the entire world economy, and it will, per definition, always lead to deflations.
Okay. Would you change your name over to your website, please? I can't do it from my end. If
oh, hang on.
Did you type that in? I assume you typed.
Yeah, but when I entered the yeah, okay. No, I can't change this.
Okay,
but but if people Google my name, Anthony Migchels, they get to my website, and it's realcurrencies.wordpress.com. Real currencies, as in real currencies.
Yeah, it's the thing I always bring up with regard to the gold standard is imagine you're in Hawaii 200 years ago, before first contact. I'll just take it. So imagine you're in Hawaii before the white man came. You're literally in paradise on earth. but there's no gold and silver. There's no gold and silver in Hawaii. You're in paradise on earth, and it's just it's just like this unbelievable degree of perfect there. But you have no gold and silver. But somehow or other, you know, you have enough food, you have enough sun, you have, you know, non-GMO food, you have organic tribal families. You know, I mean, everything is just idyllic. But then some white guys from Europe show up, like, you know what you guys need is some beer and some, you know, gold money. You guys don't have gold money. And so as soon as you adopt a currency, a monetary system, which can't, you know, is not created in your society, then you're automatically losing control of your society, because everybody, you know, eventually you need to be able to buy stuff. So you're going to have to use their currency. So it just creates a big issue. Matt Leffler says debt-free script from Congress. That's viable, but doing it through religion will not give you a good public view, especially when you back Judaism, which is literally the ones that we are fighting against. So I was just going to read that so you can hear it, Anthony. A debt-free script from Congress, that's viable, but what you're doing through religion will not give you a good public view, especially when you back Judaism. That is literally the ones that we are fighting against. So there's two issues here. Number one, that's not what Anthony is doing whatsoever. He's not so deeply into the religious aspects of all of this as I am. He's promoting the Florijn as a very secular sort of thing. So I don't want to put words in his mouth by any means. But
yeah, let me say something about that, Wayne, because I am a man of Christ. You know, you're well aware of this, and my faith is very important to me in my work. But I think that Bible thumping, there's no place for this. Every issue that we are discussing in the public domain, whether it's sexual relations, mass immigration, the government, blah, 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 I think that the Bible is a good source, and I take the Bible very seriously. But you must appreciate all these matters on a purely scientific level. And if the Bible is true on a certain issue, then you will find the scientific evidence for its proposition. Otherwise, it's not true. It's as simple as that. And I've always aimed to analyze the monetary system on its intrinsic merits. And the simple fact is that the monetary system redistributes basically all production in the world from the working people to the idle classes. Yeah, God is against this. Yeah. I'm against this too. I think that a lot of atheist people are against that too.
Yeah, like I said, I promoted mountain hours as a secular thing, and scientifically, it's provable scientifically that usury is completely unsustainable at the micro level and at the macro level. So if I loan out you know, $100 at 1% interest, the principal is 100, but the debt is 101. Right. So at the micro level, mathematically, it's impossible. At the macro level, eventually, the debt, in order to pay the debt back, you need 3 Earths, 3 or 4 or 5 Earths in terms of product to pay back the imaginary debt. So I can prove what I speak scientifically, because that's the basis. I was an agnostic for 95% of my life. I was an engineering student, and I've got a lot of math and physics background, so I can prove usury to be unsustainable with 3rd grade mathematics. You know,
exactly. Yeah.
So the reason why I get in to some of the religious stuff is what I was alluding to before: is what do we do if, you know, ultimately the dominant currency won't be a usury-free unit because the bankers control the governments. And the only way you can get past that is you need a different government, because what Matt is proposing is that you need a debt-free script from Congress. Well, that relies upon a majority vote from people that have, they never even talk about monetary reform. Show me one congressman, including Ron Paul, that talks about usury.
Mm-hmm.
You know, think of the top congressman in the last 100 years. Name one that talks about
Zero.
Lewis McFadden, all these guys that talk about the Federal Reserve. They never talked about usury.
No.
Right?
That's correct. That's correct. In fact, the reason why I started writing in English basically was because I'm a huge admirer of the American spirit and American populism. I'm not talking about the modern populism, although I'm very sympathetic to that as well. But I'm talking about the American populism from the 19th century, which was heavily against the money trust, which was really directed against international bankers, because American history is really about the struggle of the people escaping Europe, escaping the banker tyranny, and trying to find freedom in the United States. And for some time they were successful, of course. And this American spirit of the fight against the international bankers is really incredibly important for us, for all humanity. But the populists never pointed at usury as a core issue in the monetary system. They only talked about scarce money, because the United States was running on a gold standard, which was very detrimental to the people, even though the economy was growing quickly in the 19th century. But this was not because of the gold standard, as libertarians are wont to say. This was simply because America was an empty country, because all the natives had died because of the smallpox, etc. So whether we like it or not, America was an empty country which was being colonized by millions of people, and they had 10 million square kilometers. That's something like 3 times Europe or something like that. And they had it all for themselves, and obviously with such a huge windfall, there's going to be economic growth. And this is what caused the economic growth in the 19th century. It was not capitalism, as people say, or the gold standard. Absolutely not the case. There was this first exploitation of newfound American wealth, and this led to high living standards. Then in 1913, capitalism, with the Federal Reserve Act, the end game of capitalism basically came into effect. And from that point on, you were seeing that in 1913, actually, the United States for the first time was the richest country in the world per capita also. So that's very symbolic that exactly in that year the Federal Reserve started, and that is when basically also the decline of America started, because that's when the Federal Reserve and the banking cartel started to concentrate all the wealth that was created in the 19th century into ever fewer hands, and that is the process that we've been seeing over the last decades, and which is now becoming in its end game basically, because we're very close to the end.
Yeah, right now there's been some talk about Trump changing, ending the Fed and going on to a gold standard. And Matt made a comment here. China controls all the gold. They have the gold standard. So why would we want to give China the world power and the gold standard? So, we talk about this just in the same way that England used to be the world reserve currency at one point. The U.S. started it in like 45 or 47 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. I forget the name of it. But anyway,
Bretton Woods, yeah.
Bretton Woods. Eventually, they'll move that again. And potentially, if they did go to a gold standard and do they'll call it a jubilee. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. That's the way it is. Yeah, you can count on that.
And they'll make it very, very painful. It'll be the most painful thing that ever occurs. Yeah. And they'll make money. So there'll be so much famine and starvation on the bankers' jubilee that it'll be unbelievably painful. And they'll use gold and silver to do that. Can you talk about that scarce money solution?
Yeah. I call it the inflation versus deflation dialectic, because with all these dialectic, the bankers own both. So what they do is during inflations, they print all the money, and they own the inflation side of the dialectic. And for instance, with what we have now, with the Fed printing money, etc. So and then the bankers are saying, "Oh, gold is a barbarous relic," blah 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 blah, and because double speak and lying is like breathing for these people. It's completely automatic. So they call it a barbarous relic, and they suppress it, and they create conspiracies. Gold suppression is very real, and their own biggest banks have been involved in it: Deutsche Bank and Morgan Stanley, and of course the Fed itself. have been suppressing gold for years. And so then everybody thinks, oh, the bankers hate gold, so it's probably going to be good, because people have a short memory. You know, if you look a little further back in the line, you'll see that the bankers have been, just in the 20th century, actually, the bankers switched between gold and credit at least 3 or 4 times. In 1914, Britain was on a gold standard, and they ditched the gold standard because they needed more abundant money to finance the First World War. Then in 1925, Winston Churchill brought the British Empire back on the gold standard. And our friend John Maynard Keynes actually wrote a little booklet called The Economic Consequences of Mr. Winston Churchill, because he predicted the Great Depression that was indeed created with the gold standard, which is obviously not a very popular talking point with the libertarians, because John Maynard Keynes was right about something, actually. And then in the 30s, of course, there was a huge depression going on, and people were getting slaughtered by scarce money, because the depression is scarce money. That is what a depression is. And so they had to ditch the gold standard again, and they did this in different years. In Germany, they did it in 1930 or so, and I think the French left in 1935 or so. But during the 30s, most European nations, and also the Americans, left the gold standard, especially after the war started, because then again, they needed huge amounts of money, of course, to finance this war. And then after the World War ended, they installed Bretton Woods, and this was another form of a gold standard in which only the US dollar was convertible, but all other units were convertible to US dollars. So this was an indirect gold standard, which lasted until 1972. And all these monetary systems were completely under the control of exactly the same banks as are currently controlling the current monetary system. So gold or credit-based monetary systems historically have very clearly always been controlled by the bankers, and they create problems in one system, then they provide the other system as the solution, and because people have a short memory, they keep getting away with this. And currently you see a trend towards gold. You have Austrian economics in the United States and the liberty movement, which promotes gold. I love many of these guys, don't get me wrong. I love a great many of the commentators in the liberty movement. I've learned a lot of them in the past also. But I think they're very wrong in their monetary analyses of gold and Bitcoin. And I do think they should know better, actually. But apparently they don't, and they keep plugging this gold stuff. And I do promote gold as a hedge for people who have some excess cash. Because if you have money in the bank, it's not safe there. Okay, if people have money in the bank, they're basically being buffoons, because they will get robbed. The next bailout, there is not going to be a bailout of depositors in the next round of the crunch. Let me be very clear about this. The bankers themselves and the governments themselves have all written in their own policy papers that they will not again bail out depositors. Depositors will have to pay when the banks go bust next time. So putting money in the bank is not safe, and it's not bad to have a few gold coins on the side if you have money left over, because let's face it, 80% of Americans, the vast majority of Americans, live paycheck to paycheck, so to them it's no concern at all. They simply don't have savings. So but gold is a good hedge. If you have some money in the bank, you can better buy some gold, and it's probably safer. But as a monetary system, it's pure poison, and what you usually see with the gold standard is strong deflations and scarce money, leading to a huge redistribution of wealth from the working people to the idle classes.
All right, I wanted to get into, Matt had a lending question. So it's not a precise thing, but anyways, it was getting to the point about the $100. It said, would you loan me your last $100 to get the principal pack? Doubt it. You have to have an incentive to loan out your money.
Let me say that,
it's very conflated, because number one, we're talking about Federal Reserve notes. So within your system, what is your incentive to loan money out within the Florijn?
Let me put it this way. We don't lend anything. The bank does not lend anything. we create money. That is what a bank does, and that is what we do. And this money creation is a very simple bookkeeping operation. I wish I could show. I've been wanting to create something to make this more visible, because I do notice that people don't really get this, and it's so very important.
I think when I created the chicken note, basically an IOU is a usury-free loan.
Yeah, for
right.
Sure.
So one barter equals 2 IOUs. So if you and I agree to make a trade, you know, if you have an internet stream, say, okay, Anthony, you went on my stream. I want to trade you. I'll go on your net show or whatever, right? So we shake on it, or we make a verbal agreement. I owe you. I've committed to you to do something, just like you did something for me. We trade those IOUs, but like you say, well, you know, I'm not. If you said to me, I'm not set up to do it right now. How about, can I redeem this IOU later? And I go, yeah. Well, that's a usury-free loan, right? That's
the way it is, Wayne. Absolutely. And in a monetary system, in a solid monetary system, what we're moving towards is, you have on the one hand you have the debtor and the creditor. The debtor is the one who promises to pay, and the creditor says credo, and credo is Latin for I believe, and this is what creates this is what the etymological source of the word credit is. So credit means it comes from credo, I believe. So the debtor says, I promise to pay, and the community, which is the creditor in our system, and in any decent monetary system, says credo, we believe. So that is the handshake between two parties in money creation. The one that goes into debt, and the community which allows this person to go into debt because they believe the promise to pay. Either because they know this guy and they know this good for his word, or because he offers up some collateral, which is going to be the norm in the future also.
Yeah, like it's basically the promissory note when you go to a bank to get a mortgage. That piece of paper, that mortgage or the promissory note, has no value until a flesh and blood human being signs it. Yeah. And what the bankers are doing is they are monetizing our signature when we should be monetizing our own signature. The very same way that a restaurant can issue a gift certificate. The gift certificate has no value until a flesh and blood human being signs the piece of paper, and then the libertarians go, "Oh, you know, they're making money. It's backed by nothing." Yes, it is. It's backed by the produce of the restaurant. So that same thing works with frequent flyer miles, coupons, tickets to football games. All of those are producer issued IOUs. A promissory note when you do a mortgage is a producer issued IOU. And the way the banker and what they're doing, that promissory note is exchanged for the new issuance of $100,000. Yeah. Well, there's no reason why that same signature couldn't have just created the $100,000 in the first place.
Absolutely.
Without using a banker whatsoever. So that's effectively what we're doing with this initiative. And through that, because there's no usury, now you're able to pay off one mortgage as opposed to paying off 2 or 3 with usury.
Your creditworthiness rises immensely if there is no usury, because obviously if you have to pay interest, principal plus interest, you're far less likely to succeed in that than a loan without usury.
Yeah, and then mathematically, if you have 10 borrowers that all borrow at 1% apiece, now you have if they all borrow at $100,000 at 1%, that means the outstanding debt is $1,010,000. But you only have $1 million in circulation. It's mathematically impossible to pay it off. So that means it's guaranteed to have foreclosures.
Yeah.
So this is all simple math.
But I would like to add a few other ingredients to the answer of Matt's question, because his question is very important. I mean, reiterating, would you loan me your last $100 to just get the principal back? Doubt it, he says. You have to have an incentive to loan out your money. But there are two things I would like to, besides what we have just been discussing, that there is no money being lent because we are creating it with bookkeeping credit. But there are two other issues that are very important in this, because this is a misconception that Matt has. Because I would answer to him, if he asks me, will you lend me your last $100? I would say to him, I will lend you interest-free if you lend me interest-free. That's a very important thing, because what we're doing now is, because Matt is right, because most people won't lend their last $100 to their brother in need. They won't. They will say, well, what are you going to give me? Or I don't trust you to pay it back. So this no that people get when they ask for a loan, this is what sets us up for our slavery to the bankers, because we all say no to each other. This is why a banker can exist, because he exploits this no that we give each other. So if we would understand,
banker says yes.
Yeah, the banker says yes if you pay me 5%. And we must understand that we set ourselves up for this nasty business by saying no to each other. This is very important to understand. Unfortunately, in this day and age of egotism, etc., that is not realistic. And you must be realistic. And this is nice philosophy, but it's not going to work out. But if you actually understand the predicament, namely that if we say no to each other, that we relegate each other to the bank, then you can start mending your thinking, you know. Then you can start thinking, well, maybe it's not so smart of me to say no to him, because if I say no to him, he will say no to me. And that's not so handy. So that's one very important thing that I would like to reply to Matt also. And the other thing is that this mentality, would you loan me your last $100 to just get the principal back? Doubt it. You need to have an incentive to loan. This is the creditor's mentality. And the creditor mind controls us with his mentality. But what the hell do I care about the rights and the thoughts of creditors? I'm not a creditor. I'm a working man. I'm a debtor. I'm carrying this millstone of massive debt. I'm not profiting from it. So this whole mentality of the creditor does not concern me. What concerns me as a debtor and as somebody who is being crushed by usury, what is in my interests is thinking about, how do I break through this no? How can I break through this interest slavery? And if we want to ditch interest slavery, and if we want to liberate ourselves from this massive millstone that is weighing us down, because this debt is huge and it is weighing us down massively, then we must liberate ourselves of this creditor mentality, and we must think not in terms of would I lend my dollars away, my scarce dollars away to evil debtors who will perhaps not pay me back. That's not the way you want to think about people like yourself. What you want to understand is, okay, we're all being crushed by debt. How can we start thinking in a way that leads to solutions? And maintaining this creditor mentality is definitely not going to work out if we want to liberate ourselves from this business.
Yeah, as a good example of that, in the Ithaca hour system of Paul Glover in New York, they had a usury-free loan. They actually had the local credit union was taking using the currency, right? They would use it for some like simple bank fees and that sort of thing. And they had a bank, the building of the bank was expanding, and they set up roughly a $40,000 loan that they borrowed usury-free from the Ithaca Hours currency system. So the bank is a community credit union. They financed it, and since they had the vendors that could do the work, like Jim Callahan and I can build a whole lot of stuff. Jim Callahan and I could do a bank expansion because we know how to do concrete, we know how to do plumbing, we knew how to do electrical, we know how to do drywall, all of the stuff that the building I'm standing in, me and Jim built. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fantastic.
So anyway, these aren't difficult things, and the point is once you have the traders that join the system. If they join the system, they're agreeing to take the currency. So that means by definition, you can loan that very same currency out well, who's the debtor in this instance? Well, it's the bank, the local credit union. Well, they're pretty qualified. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't qualify. Like, I don't know do you qualify your borrowers to make sure that they're not transient, they're not going to just bilk the system, because that's an important aspect, that they're not transient people that are just going to leave and stick
No, listen, for the time being, our network is still fairly small. We have about 800 account holders and about 150 businesses. No, 100, no, not even that. But so it's not really big business as yet. But should we succeed, and obviously I'm suspecting we will, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this, then you need to have very solid credit clearing. I mean, you can't just give anybody a big loan, because people will freeload on the system. This is a given. And you will have freeloaders, but banking could not exist if the default of people was to default. Banker wisdom is that the masses pay, the working people pay, because they feel honor-bound by their word. This is banker wisdom now. And the rich will strategically default.
Yeah,
this is reality.
They call it capitalism for the elite, and we monopolize the victories and socialize the losses.
Yeah, exactly. That's another example of it. But yeah, the rich are known because the rich are scumbags. People tend to idolize the rich, but research shows that they're all unempathic bastards who would steal a child's last bit of candy if they could get away with it. And this is why they're rich, and they're not pleasant people. And so if they can have an opportunity to stiff somebody to make a few bucks, then that is what they will do. But the common people tend to pay, and the default rate in the banking industry is not much higher than about 2%. And online trading has also shown how benevolent people basically are in trading, because you have these things like eBay, and online trading platforms, and in Holland we have Marketplace. It's called Marktplaats in Dutch, but that is Marketplace in English. And that was a huge site here in Holland. It's been taken over by eBay now. But and the concern was, when this platform launched, was okay, now people are just going to trade without the middleman, without any oversight. It's going to be a bloody mess. But it transpired that all the common people that were trading and doing quite substantial trades on occasion, they just show up and they pay. That's what they do.
Yeah, people generally are pretty good. You know, I mean, like, especially the more cohesive a society is, the less you have of that sort of aggression. And when I was doing mountain hours, because I came from a libertarian background and I was promoting mountain hours to a lot of libertarians, the mountain hours is a physical currency. And the first thing they kept saying over and over again, well, what's to stop people from counterfeiting it? And like, well, number one, it's really not a big issue. Like, you're presenting a lot of issues that you think are a big problem that aren't. Is there a big issue right now with people counterfeiting coupons? Not right? Do people counterfeit airline tickets? You know, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's not like a real big issue.
No. Go ahead.
Concert tickets, Super Bowl tickets. You know, I'm sure some people do it, but it's not the major problem with it. The major problem with our monetary system isn't that people are counterfeiting. Like, it's because of these international conglomerates. Yeah. So getting back to the lending side, Matt,
one point to add here, Wayne, which I would like to make, and that is that obviously the powers that be have a huge interest into mind controlling us, into believing that we are unreliable, because their whole system is basically one huge protection racket. That's what it is, and they're protecting us against ourselves. That's the beauty of their game. So they need to mind control us into believing that we're dangerous and unreliable. But the truth is that experience shows that, normally speaking, you'll be pretty safe dealing with other people.
Yeah. It's. I was thinking, like, during the Continental time, the colonists had the continental and local state script systems, which were reliable. And then it was the Bank of England that had some ships in Boston Harbor or somewhere or other. And they're the ones that started counterfeiting the continental in order to destroy the benevolent currency. As to drive them into their loyal opposition solution of gold and silver, which, by the way, in the colonies at that time, there was no gold and silver mines. There's no gold and silver mines in Massachusetts or Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania. There's no gold and silver mines in Maine or Virginia. And it was only, 20, 30, 40 years later where they started finding some stuff in the mountains of, I believe, like North and South Carolina or Georgia. And they do this thing where they have the one system, and like you're saying, it's the scarce and inflation deflation dialect, that once they want to blow up one system, they blow it up, and then they have their loyal opposition solution of gold and silver waiting there when the dust settles.
This is how they operate. You know that as well as I do.
So Matt was getting to the point, kind of like talking about the time value of money, because he's making an equivalence to borrowing a car. So let me put, you give somebody your car, you expect them not to put gas in it. Is that an example how you expect something out of nothing is? So I think he's alluding to the time value of money here, because often the way that people that justify usury is they're saying, well, I'm loaning you $1 and I don't have access to it. So it's like I'm loaning you my car. So because I'm loaning it, I can't use it. Therefore, I'm deserved the time value of money because I can't use that money to invest it somewhere else. And that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a commodity like a car. We're not talking about a physical thing. Money should always be valueless, just like a gift certificate, just like a ticket, because the elite have always controlled commodities. The only commodity that poor people have is their own labor. So can you talk about the time value of money lie?
Yeah, I mean, I will, but let me first start pointing out again here that he's again thinking from the perspective of the creditor, but which has a certain purpose. I mean, it's not bad to understand how a creditor thinks. But obviously, we are not the creditors again. We are the debtors, and we are not interested in the so-called interests and the so-called rights of the rich. We are interested in the rights and the problems of the working people who are indebted. And these people we are not going to help with stories about oh, but the poor creditor, he can't invest his money somewhere else. You know, I mean, that's his problem. Our problem is, how are we going to save ourselves all these trillions in usury? And the fact of the matter simply is, I mean, if we pool our savings and if we don't say to each other, oh, but I want some money from you if I'm going to lend it to you, because you would do the same to me. And if we say so, instead say to each other, hey, I'll give you some if you give me some, you know, and work together instead of try to make a buck off each other, then we can break through this this line of reasoning of Matt. But again, even more to the point is the simple fact that there is no time value on money that is freshly created as bookkeeping. A bank has nothing to lend. The bank has no money to lend to anybody. What a bank does, it creates the money the minute we come and borrow it. And they take the money out of circulation the minute we repay it. So if I take out a mortgage, I take out 200K, and in the decades ahead, I'll be paying back 1,000 a month or so, or 500 a month, and after 30 years, I pay back the whole thing. After 30 years, this whole principle of 200K has been taken out of circulation by the bank. So every time I pay back 100, they take 100 out of circulation. And so the money is created the minute it is being borrowed, and it is being destroyed the minute it is being paid back. And obviously, money under these circumstances cannot, by definition, have any time value. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah. It gets very confusing because in some aspects, you're talking about commodity money. In some aspects, we're talking about tangential money. Yeah,
that is confusing indeed. And you have this famous quote by one of these banksters, J.P. Morgan, who says, only gold is money and all the rest is credit. That's a famous quote by him. And obviously, people run with this quote and they say, oh, J.P. Morgan said this. Obviously, he's a banker, so you'd be ill-advised to believe him. We don't take anything from bankers as truth, and this also is pure bullshit. Bankers look at money as a store of value first and a means of exchange second, and that is because their whole way of thinking is upside down because they are the creditors, so they have a different line of thinking. But for a real economist, for a usury-free economist like myself, like ourselves here, Wayne, money is a means of exchange, and it is not a store of value. It is also not a store of value. The function of money is it's a means of exchange, full stop.
Yeah. To innovate barter.
The only function of money is to facilitate exchange. That's why money exists.
Yeah.
It was never intended as a store of value, and it was also never intended to have any value in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Real money is valueless. Its only purpose is to exchange stuff that does have value, like your labor, like the products we create, services we create. That is the stuff that has actual value. Money itself is valueless because it's only bookkeeping. It's only an Excel sheet, a database with transactions in it. That's all the monetary system really is. And it's valueless. And the idea that money must have intrinsic value was invented by the mine owners 5,000 years ago, because 5,000 years ago you already had interest-free local monetary systems that were based on bookkeeping. For instance, people would bring supplies to the temple and to the marketplace, and they would be getting credits in return, or receipts for the stuff that they entered in the granaries, for instance. And these receipts started circulating in the local economy, and that was the money. Because with these receipts, you could go back any time into the granary and take out some grain, which was the underlying value for the. And this is what the monetary system used to be based on, and it was the bankers who, at some point, started polluting our understanding of money, and started to say that money must have value. And why? Because they own the mines.
Yeah, it's like me saying, if I own all the land where the coconut trees are, and I said, you know, we should make the money system based on coconuts.
Yeah, exactly. Because only coconuts have this brown color and this hairy stuff on the out, and that's exactly what we need for money. If they don't have that, it's not money, you know. It's probably credit.
It's going to go to zero at some point.
Yeah, exactly. It's fiat, you know.
Here's Matt had a point here. It goes, examples you give about creation of money from our signature is only a phenomena that has happened in the last 100 years. I speak to instances that real world situations throughout time. Anybody, you can ask for anything better to a credit, and no one gives you anything away. Nobody gives anything away for nothing. That's a logical fallacy. Well, like, you know, we're giving you, number one, like, let's address, he's basically saying that signature money never existed until the last 100 years.
That's not true. That's not true. And
what Anthony was saying exactly is that money, like Deuteronomy 14:23 through 25 talks about the tithe. So let's say we're living tribally 4,000 years ago. We're in a tribe, and once every so often we get together and we have a feast. And it's like a big potluck, and everybody brings. And what you're supposed to do is to pay your tithe to the community so that the widows and the orphans and the travelers are covered and they can survive. Everybody brings their flocks and their herds and their oil. So this is at a time there is no money. If the distance is too far away, then you issue a bond with your hand. That bond is, man, it's too far. And by the way, these guys live in my community. I'm going to bring a bond. I'm going to my 10% is, you know, I made 100 bushels of wheat. I'm going to give 10 bushels. Here's my IOU. I'm going to bring it to the potluck. I am going to give that IOU, so nobody thinks I'm a freeloader. I'm going to give that over to the judge, so that he has these assets that he can distribute. He knows who the poor and the widows and orphans are. He then distributes to the needy. And it's through this mechanism where you don't have money, or it's signature money of an IOU, or, by the way, one barter equals 2 IOUs. Those 2 IOUs are money. That is thousands and thousands at barter. How old is barter? So whether I formally write that down as an IOU, as a gift certificate, we're just trading gift certificates. That's all barter is the trading of gift certificates. So if, with respect to the lending, he's getting back to the point. Nobody will loan money without some incentive. And that's just not the case, because that's what an IOU is. Yeah. An IOU is like, yeah, I trust you. You're going to pay me back at some point in the future. Whenever I bring that IOU to you, I'm not getting it right now. So you owe me value. I have an IOU for the 10 bushels of wheat.
And basically, I can get where Matt is, but what I can say to him is basically, Matt says nobody gives something away for nothing. You want something back. What you get back for relinquishing your rights to usury is what you get back for relinquishing this claim is simply the right to interest-free credit for yourself. Because this is the conundrum. If Matt is saying, I won't give you money because you won't give me some, then of course we're stuck and we're relegated to go to a bank. But if I say to Matt, listen, I'll give you some, if you give me some, then we won't need the bank anymore.
Yeah,
and that's where you see
freely without expecting nothing in return.
Yeah,
this is a commandment from Jesus himself, and it's in Luke, I think 6:23 or 25 or something like that.
Yeah, a very crucial one. And but this is but the question is, the underlying question is, are you alone? Do you live for yourself? Is your partaking in the monetary system something that is purely individual? Or are we together? Do we have similar interests, similar problems? And is the monetary system an interplay between all the different actors? And if you are in the I'm alone camp, you think like Matt does, and that is how everybody thinks. But it's not about Matt here. I mean, what Matt is saying is what everybody brings in. These are the normal arguments that you hear against interest-free economics. But the underlying proposition is that we are alone, that every man stands for himself, etc., etc. And that is what leads to this reasoning. And this is also the wolfish mentality of the creditor. But if you realize that you have brethren who have the same problems, namely that they are slaves to the bank, then you can start thinking, listen, we probably have common interests. And one of the common interests is that it is in my interest that if I ask you for an interest-free loan, that you say yes. And it is in your interest that if you ask me for an interest-free loan, that I say yes. And if there's this understanding, then we can create a monetary system that does not even involve private lending, because in the monetary systems that we are promoting, Wayne, nobody of the participants has to surrender anything. It's all bookkeeping. It's all done by the central organization, which is just serving the people by keeping score of what transactions are going on in the economy, in the local community. And then you can organize a monetary system that does justice to the fact that we are indeed people with very similar interests, very similar problems, and that we need to work a little together. And one of the ways that we work together is saying, okay, I'll forego on this usury on loans that I give to you, as long as you do the same for me.
Yeah, money is it's a social contract for a society, and money aside, in a tribal society, what we're saying is, I'm willing to bear my brother's burdens if he's willing to borrow mine, because that's the society that I want my children to grow up in. Yeah. Because if we don't make a mental change in this selfish, capitalism, rugged individualism, that
goes only so far.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not promoting any sort of forced communism or anything. It's more of like a voluntary communalism. That's what the apostles were doing. The apostles sold their stuff and they shared it among themselves, being their brother's keepers. Like, this is all in the book of Acts. Like, they were communists, but not Bolsheviks. This was done voluntarily. They did these things. They were being obedient to a social contract where they voluntarily agreed to be governed. They didn't force it on any other people. They didn't kill anybody, but it was a tribal way of living. Think of the American Indians or First Nation people in Hawaii from 200-300. Can anybody say that the First Nation people from 200 years ago, before contact with the Europeans, that they've benefited from capitalism?
I think that they are where we will be in 100 years if we don't really clean up this mess, Wayne, because that's where we are heading to.
Yeah, it's just so destructive. Matt makes a comment about Jesus in the temple, saying Jesus was pissed off that the usurers charged a temple tax, and it had nothing to do with usury. So he's making the point. I've talked about this a million times, that it was only about the monopoly over money. It's about the monopoly over the money. One, it was also that they were freely marketing. You're not allowed to buy and sell in the temple about having a market at all. Jesus is not a free marketer. And number three, in the parable of the talents, Jesus condemns the usurers because they reap without sowing, and the one who didn't invest. So the parable of the talents is a good doctrine, because Jesus promotes investing where there's productive outcomes. So that's what we do. We're pro-investment.
Of course.
Usury, alternatively, it's gain without the production of anything. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, because usury and money is completely unproductive, of course, and unfortunately, the talent parable is often used as a rationale for usury, because Jesus says, "Listen, you should have put the money into a bank instead of putting it into the ground, because then I would have had a return." But he precedes this by saying, "If you really thought that I was that hard of heart, then you should have put the money in the bank." Because then the servant would have been loyal, because he thought his master was a bastard. So obviously a bastard will put money in the bank to gain usury, Yeah. That is what Jesus was saying, and it was absolutely not a defense of usury. It's a complete rejection of usury. Yeah. So that's let me be clear about that. And about this temple tax thing, what happened is that these money changers, they were not money lenders, but they were money changers. But that's all the same thing. Money changers, money lenders, usury and money changing, skimming tricks. I'll talk a little bit about what they were doing. All these tricks are being done by the same people. All this financial mafia stuff is all done by the same people. So usury, you and I have a big beef with usury, but obviously these inflations and deflations they are creating are just as criminal, and the money changing tricks are also completely criminal, because what were these money changers doing there? These temple taxes could only be paid with a very special shekel, a sort of silver shekel. And that was not the normal monetary system that they were using for their daily trades. You had to buy these shekels so you could pay your taxes with them, your temple taxes with them. And they were keeping these shekels very scarce, as a result of which the shekels were very expensive. And this is how they were oppressing the local people. Local people could only buy very expensive shekels for their temple taxes, as a result of which these were very high. And this is what pissed off Jesus, and this is why he attacked them. And this is also why he died a few days later, because you don't fuck with the money changers, okay? You just don't. You die. Yeah,
that's that's how it goes down. And that's why you think, let's talk a little bit about the mark of the beast aspect of this whole thing, about this unbelievable domineering control that they have of the society, so much so that the word usury almost never ever gets brought up on television. The word, like, the debt cancellation is in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts. It's right in the Lord's Prayer, but if you go to church, they don't talk about it. It's not on TV. It's not in the universities. You can't go to any university and get a degree in biblical economics. This is so much so that they have that much power in our society that it's pretty profound how much power that they have. So effectively what they have done is created the whole earth into a synagogue. They're the synagogue of Satan. Mm-hmm. And anybody that starts talking about things that are contrary to the morality of this, of these rebels to the law of Moses. They hate the law of Moses. Mm-hmm. But they impersonate the people of Moses. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that it's growing more and more apparent. Anybody that contradicts their morality gets cut out of the marketplace.
You bet.
And that's happening with deplatforming, with censorship, with these very ideas. Even the topic of monetary reform is virtually nowhere to be found on TV. It's not in the movies.
No. All you have is a little bit of libertarianism, because that is a banker-controlled philosophy, especially plugging basically gold-based money, but also very much deflation. So libertarianism is good for the bankers during downturns, because libertarians will typically defend austerity during deflation, which is pure criminal war against the people. But they need controlled opposition to promote these talking points. It's very painful. I'm not against the libertarian folks that are probably also listening to this show, because I know that they are looking to resist the current order, but this is how we are being manipulated, because they feed us with ideologies that we hope will resist the current order, but which in effect actually serve the current order. And this is an example of how this works. And help me out here, Wayne. How did we start this thread?
It's basically the way we've been domesticated. The best way to think about all of this is that we've, since birth, have gone through a very elaborate trauma-based mind control system, and it's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of deception. Mm-hmm. So there's one deception where you reject it, and you think if you get rid of that one, that you're good. But in the meantime, so it's like, I got out of the Democrat Party and now I'm a Republican.
Exactly. Hallelujah, freedom has come.
Right. Then you're a Republican. Oh man, these guys, they're supporting gun control or whatever. And now you reject that, and then you go down, and now you're a libertarian or over or whatever, and you think this is good, and you're like, man, these guys are for free markets, which means all of the jobs go to China. Yeah. The free marketers are for, all this immigration and just moving. Yeah. They're for sheep herding. So where you had, think of the Hawaiian people or the First Nation or the First Nation American Indians. You're coming to them with free market capitalism. And you say to the American Indian, hey, we have free market capitalism. Do you want some? Well, what's the benefit of it? Why is it better than what we have right now?
Well, you can work all day for nothing.
Well, you can have jobs. Why do I want to have a job? So what do you do with a job? Well, what you do is you leave your family all day long, where eventually your wife just raises the family for now. Eventually, it's gonna go worse, right? So
she'll get off working too in the near future. No worry.
Right. So eventually, it'll be the government. Our lawyer, so eventually it'll be the state will be raising your children. Yeah. So anyway, it's really just, when you think about it from a tribal standpoint, what is it? Once I adopt your system, what's the benefit of adopting your system? So that I can have, you know, if you're First Nation, so that I can have all of my products made in China? Is that why? So that I can have alcohol and addiction? So that you can, just like the British Empire brought opium into China at the force of a gun? Do you know what I mean, with the opium wars?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Have a free market. A free market means you've commoditized everything and we can rent your daughters for sex. That's what a free market means.
That's what it's all about, Wayne. And we are being bamboozled with all these bullshit stories, and they don't serve us at all. And yeah, and it's, you know, one of the sad things of being a Westerner is we like to think of all the achievements of Western civilization, but unfortunately over the last few centuries we have been the main purveyors of capitalism, mostly as slaves, but we have also identified with it. And the sad thing is that we are Mordor, and the natural civilizations, the natural societies that we used to have, also in Europe, these were the hobbits. And what Tolkien in the Lord of the Rings describes is simply the ascent of capitalism and modernity, and how it crushes natural living, nature, our social way of being together, and all this money grabbing and technological progress, yada yada yada. It's darkness, and there is no real technological solution to our human problems. This is a typical Luciferian mindset, actually, that our spiritual problems can be solved because our problems are spiritual in nature, and that they can be solved with more technology and with more money and with harder work, etc., etc. But that's all not going to work out. And we think we are civilized and that we are advanced, which is not the case. The kind of complete garbage that people on average believe is really quite astounding. And we live in a very dark age where many people can believe that aborting children has something to do with women's rights, or you know, that sexual liberation is not about controlling your sexual impulses, but about doing whatever the hell pleases you, you know, at the expense of everybody else. And all these insane ideologies that we have been running behind, like also nationalism. People are very happy with nationalism nowadays because it seems better than globalism. But what is very easy to forget is that in 1914 and in 1939, two enormous bloodletting started by heavily nationalist parties, whether it be the National Socialist Democratic Labour Party in Germany, or Mussolini, or the French, or the British, or the Americans. They were all incredibly driven by nationalism, and this blinded them to the truth that they were killing their brothers. And all these insane ideologies of modernity make this really a very dark age. And the idea also, for instance, let's forget the main hoax of all, namely the time value of money. This is announced in modern economics as the main achievement of economics during modernity, the time value of money, and it's called the central tenet of modern economics, the time value of money. Yeah. And it's complete garbage, you know. It's complete garbage of the most moronic kind, but everybody believes in it, and this is why we live in a dark age. And the kind of development that a cultured man had even 100 years ago was way ahead of even people like ourselves, you know, who are pretty on top of things. Try making a Harvard entry exam of the late 19th century. You won't even understand the question, Wayne, let alone be able to answer it. Okay. Yeah. That's because these people, the kind of thinking and education, you can also, when you read old speeches of the 19th and 18th century, if you read in these speeches, the command of the language was just way ahead of anything that you hear in the public domain today. And the grasp of the issues, the grasp of human psychology, of the makeup of the human being, these people were way ahead of us. And we think we have progress and that we are therefore better than the people were a few hundred years back. In many, 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 many ways, we are far more primitive, and we have degenerated immensely over the last few hundred years. But because we can make a plane, We think we are demigods, but we are barbarians. That's what we really are, and that is why we are dying. The West is not dying because we are doing so well. The West is dying, and it's literally dying, because the West was 33% or so of world pop in 1900, and it's about 8% of world pop nowadays. So the West is dying, and this is not because we are so successful. This is because we are completely and utterly bankrupt on every imaginable level. That is why we die, not because we are good.
Yeah, it says in the word, for lack of vision, my people perish.
Yeah.
But he who keeps the law, happy is he. And keeping the law is the abolition of usury. So it's the going back to the logos that E. Michael Jones talks about quite a bit.
Yeah. That's a great line. I mean, logos means word, and you know as well as I do the first few sentences of John. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's logos, and
the West is going under, all Earth is going under a spiritual death. Our problem is not lack of, it's not lack of land, it's not lack of money or lack of resources. Yah created a perfect hardware. The hardware is perfect. We're corrupted by software issues. And the software can be reprogrammed, and it could be done non-violently. It doesn't, I always make an analogy with changing the money system. It's like having a blood transfusion. We have a poisonous system, and the money itself is the conveyor of the poison. It expands and grows like leaven, and it poisons the whole system. And that the body politic is prostrate on the ground, and the vultures are picking on it because it's so spiritually destructive. We are committing collective suicide because of this poisonous money system. And simply by changing the money system, there's no reason why we can't have unlimited funds for a benevolent entertainment system, a benevolent news system, a benevolent educational system, a benevolent government, because it's the money that finances all of that stuff. He who pays the piper calls the tune, and the money lenders are the ones that are financing all of these destructive industry. The medical industry is destructive, the legal industry, all of our institutions are destructive.
It's all poison. Yeah.
And by doing expanding Anthony's money system, you know, where you are, how do we, what is necessary in order to create that and bring it to the United States? Like software wise, like how difficult, how much would it cost money wise to, you know, change it over to a dollar-based system and all that sort of thing?
Listen, we could create a really fantastic website with the entire monetary system that I've invented with my colleagues implemented in it. And we could start servicing the entire world with basically what could be become a real competitor for Bitcoin as the internet currency. And for basically, let's say just 10 grand, I mean, to be on the safe side. And that would be enough to create this website and have everything, and have a few bob left for to start our organization with.
So basically, for a crowdfunding initiative, we could start a crowdfunding initiative for about $10,000.
Yeah.
And by definition, you are getting, because you're crowdfunding, you're getting a whole bunch of people potentially that would be traders, that they would be participants of the currency as well, right? Yeah. So then potentially they could be borrowers from the system. Potentially at one point they can get mortgages from the system, et cetera, et cetera. What is the mechanism for those who promote the system to get compensated, to get people to adopt the system? What's the compensation?
Yeah, how we work in Holland is that people who's the system is free for consumers, but businesses pay 10 Florijn per month if they have sufficient turnover. So it's if you gain nothing from the system, we won't charge you anything. But if you make about 1,000, if you turn out over your first 1,000 in the system, we expect you to pay a tenner per month to help us settle our costs. So this is absolutely not. This is a very fair deal, and it comes down to about 120 per year. And what we do is we offer this 120 per year to resellers. So if people sign up businesses for the system, and these businesses start paying into the system, the 120 per year, we don't take that money ourselves, but we pass it on to the reseller who has signed up the business to the system. And as long as the business participates in the system while paying, this will be an ongoing income stream for the reseller. And if you think about this, that means that if you sign up 100 paying businesses, then you already have an income of 1,000 Florijn per month, and it only gets better from there. So that's a very it's a basic mechanism, but it's also a potentially very powerful one. But it has not been entirely easy selling the Florijn as yet. So we want, of course, more growth, and we are progressing, and we have huge challenges here, of course, because I spend far too much time making money to pay the rent, which obviously severely distracts from the mission. But that will only get better when time goes on, and yeah, that's the basic mechanism that you were asking for.
Then just hypothetically, then let's say we had a US-based system called the Exodus, right? How then would you convert? Let's say you're in Holland and you operate off the Florijn, but you're coming to the United States and you want to convert over to the Exodus currency. What would be the mechanism for you to do that?
There are basically two things that you can do. You can do a currency swap. That means that your Exodus organization would open an account with the Florijn organization, and I would open an account with Exodus, and you would deposit, say, 1,000 Exodus into my Exodus account, and I would deposit 1,000 Florijn in your Florijn account, and then you can use your Florijn to make payments for your participants in my network. And I can do the same for my participants who want to do exchanges in your network. And these currency swaps have to be managed, because there is a risk that one network buys more from the other than the other way around, and then you would have disbalances in the system. So you have to guard for that. But this is one simple practical way of going about it. But the future would be, say that if you're very successful and you sign up 1 million American businesses, and basically you thank the Federal Reserve, and which I hope you will succeed in doing. And I'm successful here in Holland as well, and we thank the Dutch bank here, the Nederlandse bank, with 1 million Dutch businesses signing up here. Then it wouldn't be too much of a hassle to program an exchange, which would facilitate convertibility between the Exodus and the Florijn in very similar fashion as we currently have convertibility to euro. That would be the ultimate solution.
So currently, are you basically offering the Florijn? It's a national, or is it regional, or just local in a town, or how does that work?
The practical limitation is that you need to be able to speak and read Dutch to manage the website. If you don't manage Dutch, you can't really use the website. And in fairness, the Florijn was intended for basically the Dutch-speaking economy, which is Holland and North Belgium.
Okay.
But that is. Let me explain a little bit about this, because it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, you can create money on many different levels, but I do believe that money also has to express community. So the euro, for instance, is a bogus currency, because it transcends the local communities that it is supposed to serve. You know, a Dutchman. Okay, we're all Europeans here in Europe, but I don't really feel much of a connection with a Greek guy, for instance, especially not if I'm supposed to pay off his debts, as is currently the situation. So you want a community which can exist on many levels. For instance, in the United States, to go national means that you will, that is already a bit too big in many ways. You know, not if it's just a virtual currency that is supposed to target the internet, which is a very important market, but the US dollar, for instance, is way too big, and is also not successful in serving all communities equally well, because, for instance, New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, they will have plenty of dollars, but local economies in Arkansas and in all the backward, in Virginia and all the backward regions that you have in the United States, these are getting deflated by the stronger, more competitive regions in the United States, and the government has to constantly pump money back into these local economies to keep them going, which leads to taxation, to bureaucracy, blah 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 blah, has all sorts of problems. What is necessary is that local economies like that of Arkansas and Virginia and all these lesser developed economies, they should run their own regional currencies, which would facilitate an inflation in the local economy with economic growth, because these local economies could be very successful actually, and there is absolutely no reason for the countryside to be so depressed. The only reason why this is so is that in these major currencies, the cities, they suck up all the money and all the working capital, as a result of which the countryside is being deflated. But Arkansas could simply revive its own economy now by creating a local currency. No problem. Yeah. And so you can create currencies on many different levels. I have decided to create one on a Dutch level, because I previously had a regional currency here in Holland, servicing only Gelderland, which is a province in the Netherlands. But then later on in life, I realized that this was not the right level to create a currency on, because nobody here in Holland is interested in provinces. You're a Dutchman. That's who you are. That's the basic level of identity, and therefore I decided it would be much better to create a currency on a national level here. But obviously, everybody in the world who's trying to fathom these questions for himself in his own context must think, what is the right scope for my currency? And these questions are never they're not exact science. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, because when I was thinking this through with Mountain Hours, is ultimately the currency has to be able to provide the things required in order to sustain life. Yeah. So that means that the currency needs to be big enough. And the big methodology where Babylon controls things is through the petroleum economy. Yeah. Because how do you fuel your car? So the big hurdles are tax and fuel. Fuel is big, yeah. Maybe electric, those sorts of things. So I kept thinking, so I was thinking, okay, with electric, I can bypass that monopoly with solar. With food, up in Summit County, we couldn't bypass that monopoly because all of the food's coming down, from the Front Range at 5,000 feet, and we're at 10,000 feet. So you need to have your monetary system somehow or other. You got to have farmers, otherwise you're not self-sufficient, and your currency won't be self-sufficient. It'll be dependent upon some other group of traders. So farmers, like in Florida, so here in Tampa, on my property itself, we can farm. But then there's going to be some things like, okay, well, how do we get televisions and electronics and all that sort of stuff? And that's all in China. Well, we can start manufacturing that here. There's nothing stopping us. But, whereas as opposed to in Breckenridge, my idea there was to create like domes, like domed enclosed greenhouses to do it so that you can grow at altitude. So it's all of these problem solving things that if you start at the end, what do you need at the end? And you need to be able to sustain life. Why do you need to be able to sustain life? Eventually, you need to be able to hire the police and or military, and you need to be able to, because you need to be able to pay taxes, and you need people to be able to do law enforcement. You need to be able to finance a government. and a government that accepts the currency, and they're never going to accept the currency if they can't pay their taxes and sustain life themselves. So the monopolies that the bankers set up is you can't pay your mortgage with a currency other than theirs. So with the Jubilee and debt forgiveness, you wipe out the mortgage. But now you need a new currency, and you need to be able to lend, and your system does that. You can lend. So the existing loans really aren't a problem. We can just wipe them away. And I always viewed it like you want to start to have a vision that will accomplish all of the biggest goals that are imaginable, to have a currency that can do absolutely all. The currency that we have today, meaning the Federal Reserve note, it fulfilled all of the dreams of the Satanists. That one day that they would take over the whole planet and be able to take their mindset of we see their morality promoted in Hollywood, and in which is pedophilia, which is rebellion from the law of Moses. It's the opposite. It's Madison Avenue. It's Disney. It's taking children and turning them into little porn stars, right? That's what Britney and Miley and all that they did, right? So they fulfilled their dreams with their money system. It gave them unlimited funding to promote their morality, perpetual war, perpetual debt, perpetual inflation, and completely take tribally self-sufficient people and get them to war on each other and adopt the morality of their oppressors. That's what we have right now. We've adopted the morality of our oppressors. So similarly, a monetary system, if we start with the mindset of what do we want to do, is, well, we want to have perpetual peace. We want to have perpetual bearing of burdens of our brothers. We want to have trust and cohesive societies. We want to have the land where it's not sacred, where some guy like, think of Hawaii, you have Mark Zuckerberg. He came in and bought a whole bunch of land in Hawaii. Meanwhile, the people that are native Hawaiians, they're getting kicked off their land. Why is that? Because of money. Money and money alone. It's not because he's more noble. It's not because he works harder. It's not because he's more moral, money and money alone. So anyway, starting with a money system from scratch as a developer, as an engineer or an architect, we have to be able to sustain life. And it's that currency's ability to sustain life that will enable all of these dreams to be fulfilled, so that our children aren't living this living nightmare that we're living through. Because if we dump it onto our children, like, what kind of parents are we,
personally, I believe that the greatest wealth that we will see with a decent monetary system is the incredible decline in working hours, because people just don't get it, how incredibly enslaved they are. I mean, I was shocked when I found this out myself years back, but before there was Usury, people worked 10 to 15 weeks per year to feed their entire family. A guy like yourself, like myself, we would work 10, 15 weeks per year. Yeah, you know this, but for the people out there. And I mean, that is what we have lost. And if you have to work 40 hours, 50 hours per week, just to make ends meet, because these people that are working like slaves like this, these are not well-off people. These are people that just manage to pay the rent. So what you now have is daycare facilities where children are offered for basically for state supervision. Even if these facilities are commercial or not, doesn't matter. I mean, but these are now available 24 hours a day. I mean, what kind of life is this? In China, you have parents. They see each other on Saturday with their one child, and then they return back to the factory. And
my son just walked in. Speaking of the children, come here, buddy.
Yeah.
He's being shy. We're super proud of him. He memorized this whole book called the Little Blue Truck, and he recited the whole thing off of his head last night when I made a video of it. And it was his grandparents are here, so we're real happy. In fact, I got to go. I'm sure you do as well. We've been on, I think, for 3 hours now.
Yeah, it should be enough. I think we managed to cover the basics here, Wayne.
But I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your efforts on this very important mission. Matt Leffler, thank you for your comments, and Karen Schreier. And any final words for the yellow vest people, for the people protesting in the streets?
Yeah, I mean, go for it. Take your money out of the bank and tell the French to take their money out of the bank, and think about this interview, think about usury and what we need for the future. And more power to you people. And I'm pretty sure that that a movement that starts taking on the banks will go places. And I'm very grateful for the Gilets Jaunes. And I bought one at the first opportunity that I had, Wayne, and they make me very very proud and happy that they are calling for this bank boycott. They really do.
Yeah, all right, go yellow vesters.
And I don't want to be a Marxist fist here, but still, more power to the people. And I'm elated to have been able to talk to you for a few hours, Wayne. You know I'm your biggest fan, and I hope we will be able to do this again soon, and say hello to your beautiful family.
All right, everybody check out Anthony's Florijn, the usury-free currency. It's convertible, it's usury-free, and what's the other thing? There's 3.
Well, yeah, it's just great, you know. It's just the best money there is.
Yeah. Check it out. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for spending the time. See you later.
Yeah, take care, Wayne.